p.m. May I ask everybody to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, may you please call the roll?
Mayor Bell.
Here.
Member Berner.
Here.
Mr. Farrell.
Here.
Ms. Kay. Here. Mr. Spencer.
Here.
Ms. Tillerson. Here. Mr. McClellan will be attending. Yes, he's going to be at Zoom. They're working on it.
Thank you. The first item of business on the agenda is approval of the minutes of the February 4th, 2025 meeting. Those minutes were circulated to council members in event of this meeting. Are there any suggested or proposed changes to the minutes?
No.
I gave mine already to Petra.
None, thank you.
With those changes, the minutes are approved. Next agenda item, citizen comments on agenda items only. Mr. Ziangaro.
Bill Mancusi-Ungaro, 13 Buffalohead Drive, Kiowa. I just had two items I wanted to highlight. One, I was pleased and interested to see that the town is creating a resilience committee, because I really think that's sorely needed on the island. But I also thought that might be something that coordinating with KICA also and having a joint committee, because KICA has its own set of resiliency issues and the town does, and I think they should be intermeshed together. It's just a suggestion. The other thing has to do with the stormwater regulation. I know it's in second reading, or not sure where in the process it is. And I was pleased that you all adopted the 2017 Charleston County numbers, because having worked at EPA for as long as I did, the numbers from then are just not even relevant anymore. But even the 2017 numbers are a little bit behind the times. Our weather patterns have changed. The amount of rainfall we get at a given time has changed. And I think, as I had written in a note to the town council before your time, it's something that the town should look at. Charleston is starting to redo their numbers. And Kiowa, because we're somewhat unique in terms of topography and sediments, our soils, that we may want to be looking at our own set of numbers that are relevant to how our stormwater operates. Just a suggestion.
Thank you, Phil. Any other citizen comments? None. We have council member updates. I'll begin. Several items. One, I would like to first welcome to the town of Kiowa Island, newest member of our senior staff, which is our new Director of Communications and Public Affairs, Meredith Blair, who's in the back of the room. I hope many of you will get to know her. She comes to us from Channel 5, where she has been a reporter and a weekend anchor. And she has a degree in multimedia in journalism from Virginia Tech. And I would note that we had, what was it, Councilmember Kay and Stephanie, 240 or so applications for the position. And I think it's fair to say that many of those were not necessarily suited for the position, but there definitely were some that were. In fact, we had a very strong slate of final candidates, and Ms. Blair acquitted herself extraordinarily well in the interview process. I was assisted in that with Councilmember Kay, who has a communications background, and Stephanie, our town administrator, and we were unanimous in our view that that she would do an extraordinary job on behalf of the town as our new communications director. So we look forward to working with her. Somewhat in the communications realm, we sent out a town announcement earlier this week. There was a little bit of a cyber email related issue. A number of people around the community were getting an email that indicated that supposedly coming from me, it didn't come from me, but said that I was seeking, and in fact referenced our finance director as well, some immediate monies to be sent somewhere. It was
Somalian.
I would say that grammatically, it did not pass the laugh test, but nonetheless, people were concerned about it. The main point is that there was no indication, we had our IT vendor look at the issue, no indication of anybody's email accounts, whether at the town or outside, actually being hacked. As a result of this incident. It appears as all they did was scrape email addresses off of the towns or other websites and applied some kind of algorithm to know that I was in some position of authority, as was Dorota. So that's all that was. But we sent out an announcement, just encourage anybody to look at if whatever name up there, drop down and look at the actual email address that it's coming from, and one could quickly discern, apart from all the grammatical issues, that there should not have been any concern. Quick update, our wildlife biologist, Jim Jordan, is not here today, but we want to try to continue to provide a regular update on coyotes on Kiowa Island. Fortunately, there have been relatively few sightings over the last couple of weeks. And that's in part, we believe, because it's been kind of past mating season now, and a lot of the prior sightings were related to mating season, plus prior year cubs that were now juveniles and were still wandering around before they've left the island. One thing that's noteworthy is the town had set traps, captured 2 coyotes, one about 2 or 3 weeks ago, a juvenile female, but clearly one who'd probably been a prior year's brood that was thought to be potentially one of the coyotes, or the coyote that had been wandering around and seen more often, captured and collared, and that coyote underwent some professional hazing. And as a result of that professional hazing, or probably as a result of that professional hazing, the coyote chose to leave the island. So it was tracked now somewhere near Botany Bay or Edisto. Another adult female, was captured and collared on Captain Sam Spit. And it was the belief of the biology team, wildlife biology team, is that's probably the female in the dominant pair. And the tracking is she's still on Sam Spit, is doing her thing, but there have been no sightings otherwise of the coyotes. So fortunately, no coyote incidents, and not much in the way of reported sightings recently. I just want to note, maybe Stephanie, you were going to cover this anyway, that I'm not sure everybody, notwithstanding the town's putting out an announcement, was aware of the fact that the off-leash dates changed. So they moved up 2 weeks. So the off-leash, we're now on leash as of March 1. That's 2 weeks earlier in the past, but it's extended 2 weeks beyond prior years on the back end in the fall. So there's been no change in the overall amount of time that dogs are off-leash or on-leash. What other items here? We were planned to begin working, I don't see, is Brian here? Brian, when is the work on the leisure trail? Just so everybody knows, we're going to be doing some work repaving the leisure trail on Beachwalker Drive that had never been done, but basically between the main intersection around the KIRE entrance into Bobcat Lane. And then we're redoing a portion, one or two portions of the leisure trail on Kiowa Island Parkway where there's regular flooding to try to address those issues. But Brian, when does that work like? Anticipate, we want to get it done before essentially the high season starts.
Yes, sir. I've got a meeting scheduled with the contractor and the supervisor Thursday morning, and we're going to go over our schedule and timeline. But in previous conversations, they've told us that we'll be able to get that done middle of April, certainly before Easter, before the high season begins. So I'll have a more definite timeline after this.
And it should just be a couple of days, correct?
Yes, sir. Right. We'll have the
Okay, thank you, Brian. One other issue that I need to mention, and for my fellow council members as well, that's in Mr. Gottschalk's bailiwick, is that council had previously authorized bidding out a new landscape contract for the town. We'd gone through that process, and there were a couple of hiccups on that. I know we have the town attorney on with us. Given the staff's initial recommendations and then kind of going back to each of the bidders, and the recommendation of our town attorney and his colleagues who are involved in procurement matters was, given what had transpired, that while we could go forward as intended, the recommendation was for the town to actually rebid that contract. So we will be doing that in the very near future. We appreciate the fact that the current vendor has agreed to continue to provide services on a month-by-month basis until that occurs. I don't know if you're going to talk about this, Mr. Chairman. You're going to talk about state tax applications, so I won't touch upon that. I do. Looking over at the town clerk, I actually I want to note that we received an extraordinarily nice note from the Conservancy with regard to what they consider to be an extraordinarily successful tag sale. I don't know how many of you, if any of you, had a chance to come to the tag sale that took place here in council chambers a week ago, Friday and Saturday. It was almost floor to ceiling with stuff. And the line out the door, I think that it opened at 8 o'clock in the morning and the line was forming at 7:30 in the morning. But the entire time, setting up, monitoring, and taking down was our town clerk, Petra Reynolds, and the Conservancy sent a very, very nice note to us about the assistance she provided. So thank you, Petra, on behalf of the community.
I think it should also be noted that she contributed significantly to the profits.
Well, in fact, I saw several members of staff and council members also doing the same thing.
And mayors contributing.
Mayor's contributing. I was told to get rid of stuff, not bring more stuff home. Then just catch up quickly on a couple of development items. Probably the most noteworthy one, development related, that folks have been interested in is with regard to the opening of the Cape Club. You would be probably aware of a couple things. One, the club had sent out a notice that their original intent was to open the club facilities, Cape Club facilities, on or around April 15th. I think they may be looking to actually move that up a week or two. As I had indicated when Tom Nevin, the club operating manager, had reached out to us, that there were 3 conditions before that could occur. One was completion of the cul-de-sac at the end of Southern Pines Lane. That is now substantially complete. At least all the paving has been done. There still needs to be some landscaping work and ultimately permanent barrier between Beachwalker Drive and Southern Pines Lane, but that work is in progress. Second was that the KICA consideration of an MOU waiver, that happened yesterday morning, a special call meeting. And the third was that the town formally received a request for a temporary certificate of occupancy showing an operating and parking plan. I don't know that we formally received that via Citizen Serve as directed by our planning director, but he may know, but I know we've informally received the request. And our operating assumption, at least as we've been apprised, is essentially the parking and operating agreement as reflected in the amended or the MOU waiver that the KICA board approved yesterday. So I would anticipate at this point in time that there aren't any other hurdles to having, until we see that, but assuming that is forthcoming shortly from the Kiawah Island Club or the partners, that we would anticipate issuing the temporary certificate of occupancy that allow the Cape Club to open as planned. Somewhat related to that, Ocean Park and West End site plans, as we previously reported, as a result of the mediation settlement agreement that was finally approved a month ago by a consent order signed by the judge. Site plans have been submitted for both Ocean Park and West End. They've been under building plan review for a period of time. There's been some back and forth. I believe where Ocean Pines stands is the town's building department last issued comments more than a month ago. Haven't received anything back from that yet. I'm sorry? Friday morning? Okay. Okay, very good. Thank you for that update, Amanda. So anyway, that's Ocean Pines. So I assume that in the relatively near future of the building plans, I don't know whether, there's been a resolution of any of the comments that were raised. Subsequent to that, zoning permit would be issued, and at some point thereafter, I would anticipate that you would start doing whatever you need to do around Ocean Pines. I believe that we're a bit further behind on the West End building plan and site plan review. MUSC, there is I don't know exactly what it is. It's a topping ceremony. I'm not sure what that what that entails really, but that's next Monday. Just the
The top off is usually what the last piece of steel is erected.
Okay. Well, they're calling it that.
So groundbreaking then.
People have been asking about Andell West. We hadn't heard anything for a long period of time. Now Andell West or Riverstone has requested a meeting with the town that's actually scheduled for later this week. Issues primarily related to a potential roundabout outside of Andell West. We're a long way from anything, but at least we may have a better idea after that meeting of exactly where they are in the process, if anywhere. So stay tuned on that. A little off island, there have been a couple of notices gone out from Johns Island Advocate as of today and the Conservancy, the Island Park Place development, or the so-called Health and Wellness Village just up the road. That's back on the county calendar right now. It's scheduled for a hearing before one of the committees on Thursday. And I believe it's on the county council calendar for first reading on March 11th. So those of you who are interested in that project, and many people have, you may want to reach out to county council members to express your concerns about that. I see Mr. Warren in the room. I don't know if there's much I can provide in the way of update regarding the Night Heron Activities Building. I understand there were some issues regarding the boardwalk, but but not the building itself.
Anybody who's done a restoration project, plus the building, you get into restoration, discover that the support for the main boardwalk area was failing, and so we've had to tear it all out and start from scratch, and so and they're still supposed to be open by sometime at the end of March for that area. So they're every day helping. They ask me to leave every time, so but yeah, we're making progress over there, and we're looking forward to getting it done this year.
Thank you. That concludes my update. Councilmember Berner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a lot of, well, not a lot, but I have many things, but I'll be intentionally brief. But first, I just had to share with you one of the most warm moments I ever had. This past weekend, I happened to be in Charlotte to attend a MSL soccer game. And the whole point of telling you this is that at the beginning of the game, when the national anthem was being sang, right, the singer stopped intentionally, I think, after the first two lines. The entire stadium finished the national anthem robustly with no music or a singer accompaniment. It was the neatest thing I have seen in the longest time. I just wanted to share that with you guys. If, and this is a big if, we continue with the community center project, the thought concept is that it may include some sort of entertainment venue with stage and seating for, who knows, 300, 200, whatever. So I started talking to the Kiowa Arts Council to find out their kinds of needs, and we're gathering, or I'm gathering all this information together with them and the Arts Guild, what they would like to have in a facility like that as a new amenity. So that, that's going on. Interviewed a new town enforcement officer, selected a great candidate. She's a very strong woman. I'm looking forward to her showing up. She's going to be a great addition to the enforcement effort. Mr. Spencer and I attended a First Net meeting, and I'm not going to steal his thunder, but the First Net meeting is going to be a great add to this town for increasing our telecommunications. Mr. Spencer will tell you more about that. I met with Patria St. John regarding our tree ordinance. Wonderful document. I am so happy with the effort that she has put out with respect to this tree ordinance. It's going to help the beautification of this island and retainage of great trees. We commenced discussions with what to do to eliminate those ugly white sticks leading into the first gate at Little Rabbit. So we now have an idea on the board. We're going to be retaining engineering firm to put forward a small island there with roll-on, roll-off curbs, but that process is in the works. The sticks shelf life is limited now. Finally, the mayor and I met with the new sheriff regarding what coverage he's going to be able to provide. It's still up in the air, but we are meeting with the sheriff, and so far all signs are looking very good. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Berner. Councilmember Kay.
Okay, I'm going to start with the increased attention on Bobcat initiatives. I think everybody in the audience is aware of the fact that our population declined a bit. And so when we were most successful at increasing the number of Bobcats, it was because we got folks to sign a Bobcat pledge. And that pledge got revisited and interest dropped off. So the efforts that we're going to be taking now are going to be increasing numbers of signatures on that pledge. And so the first opportunity we have to do something big about that is on Earth Day. So you might want to mark your calendars, Friday, April 25th, over at Knight Heron Park. We will be a much bigger presence at Earth Day this year than we have been at prior years. And the planning started on this a month or so ago, and we're going to have contests so that if people collect 5 or 10 new signatures of residents, they get entered into a raffle. The prizes that we're going to have for the raffle winners are going to be pretty exciting. Not all that generic, so you'll want to get right on board with this. We'll have kind of a Bobcat wheels with questions, you know, a spin the Bobcat wheel, you get a prize. We're going to have coloring for kids. So all of this, again, is an increased effort to get people committed again to the safety of our Bobcats and bring those numbers back up to the 40 or so numbers that we had when we were at the most healthy. Also, to supplement those Bobcat initiatives, we've got a couple of cards that we're having that are, I don't know if Shai's not here, has developed cards. One is a Bobcat card, things you need to know about Bobcats. The other is a coyote card that plays off of Jim Jordan's manual now for coyote management and ways to deal with coyote interactions if that happens. And we're hoping to place those, well, I'm happy to see Roger here. We'd like to place them at the Welcome Center for people who are checking in. We'll put them here. We'll put them at the Sandcastle. We'll put them with the other rental agencies. But again, increase awareness on both of those really important wildlife animals. I have a lot to say about the new resiliency committee, but I think I'm going to wait until we talk about that as part of the regular agenda item. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Councilmember Kay. Before turning to Councilmember Farrell, you made a reference that I should have, when I mentioned coyotes, about the coyote management
Right,
plan.
that has.
I would note for the benefit of the community that it was previously a draft. It's actually undergone some significant revision, has now been finalized. You can find that on the town's website. The changes that were made to the coyote management plan reflect a lot of input we received from the community. Councilmember Farrell.
So it's budgeting season, and we've been started about a month ago working on our budget for the town. We presented a first draft at Ways and Means earlier today, and it's very good news. The bad news is our expenses are going up, probably more than we'd like. The good news is our revenues are going to go up even more, and so at the end of the day, we're going to be putting money into reserves, even with our operating budget this year. We continue to be very conservative in how we approach our budgeting, both from the revenue side and from the expense side. But it suffices to say the town is very healthy and will be even more healthy as we go through this year with the increase in revenue that we're expecting. Part and parcel to that is accommodation tax. That's part of the budget. Applications are now open, or will be open March 5th. For receiving applications for accommodation tax subsidies. That will last through the month of March till the 28th, and then the staff will review, and it'll be presented on April 24th to the state tax committee. And again, this is an effort where organizations can use money that the town provides through the taxation system for growing, promoting, and expanding tourism. And as the chairman of the committee says, is putting heads in beds. Is that right, Dorada? Is that the phrase? Putting heads in beds. So we're very excited about that process going forward. As part of that, we've done a deep dive into what we've done in state tax before and all of our accommodation taxes, looked at the regulations, and we've taken the next step of comparing what we do with what our other island communities do up and down the coast of South Carolina. And two things jump out at us. One is we are incredibly conservative in how we've used state tax money from the town standpoint in the past. And two, we're a lot more forthcoming with assets. If you look at, I think it's Isle of Palm, they distribute, it's either $50,000 or $70,000 in total for applications for state tax. So we take a very different approach. And again, it's to promote and expand and grow tourism, broadly speaking. So we're reinvesting in our community by doing this.
Councilmember Farrell, if I just kind of add to that point, underline that point. IOP generates a similar amount of total accommodations tax revenue as does Kiowa Island, which is a little over $3 million annually. But they allocate only about $50,000 to outside organizations outside the town itself.
So we have a very different approach. There's also a lot of different requirements that other municipalities put on the applicants. We're not going to apply those requirements. At this time, we're still really focused on trying to do what the money's really intended to do, which goes back to putting heads in beds, expanding the economic base of the town by recruiting, if you will, tourism to come to Kiowa. And so it's very gratifying to see how much we reinvest in our community and how strong our efforts are in this area. So with that, I'll turn it back to the mayor.
Just emphasize one other thing. We want to really encourage, perhaps more so than has been in the case in the past, outside organizations to take a look at the permitted expenditures under the state accommodations tax. We can probably add that to any communication we put out and encourage people, organizations that think they might be able to expend the funds consistent with state allowed categories to make applications to the town. It includes advertising and promotion of tourism, promotion of the arts and cultural events, This one is really construction, maintenance, and operation of facilities for civic and cultural activities. That's including construction, maintenance, and access of nearby roads. It's really a town one, same thing with criminal justice, law enforcement, fire protection, solid waste collection, health facility, but also tourist shuttle transportation. An important one, control of waterfront erosion, beach renourishment. So all of those are explicitly permitted categories of use of state ATAX funds. So there are organizations that think they have projects that fit within those categories. We encourage them to apply. Councilmember Spencer.
Thank you, Mayor Belt. First of all, Phil, happy Mardi Gras. I'm glad I'm not in New Orleans in that heavy downpour and high winds they've got today. Hope to see some of you tonight at the Sandcastle at 6. Hope I'm out of here in time to go to that. So a few things. The Infrastructure and Public Works Committee is going to be having its kickoff meeting this Thursday at 10 right here in council chambers. That was in the town newsletter Friday. We've got a pretty full agenda of things that we're going to be considering as part of that committee. Maybe we should talk about the stormwater standards as well. Maybe we can add that onto it. If not this one, the next one. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Berner, for the plug on FirstNet. The town's transitioning to FirstNet, which is the National Public Safety Broadband Network. It's a federal network that provides interoperability and priority and preemption, special app store and stuff like that for first responders at the state, local, and national level. So in 2 weeks, the town's going to start transitioning onto FirstNet. So that'll help us, especially in emergency situations, have better communications amongst the town as well as with Charleston County and other agencies that would be supporting us. So thanks for that. We probably should talk about Barrier Island Ocean Rescue and
Yeah, go ahead.
get them on too. I just thought of that. Also, and if you guys want to check after the council meeting or sometime when you're here, thank you, Mayor Belt. We bought a Starlink terminal to have, and it's a mobile version, and it's high capacity, so it could be used for a lot of different things. Michael in the Public Works Department was the driver behind that. You know, one of the uses could be if we lose internet during emergency here where the Emergency Operations Center and town staff are, you know, it could provide that internet access. A lot of communities have used Starlink in other disasters and emergency situations. So it's good to have that available, and we'll figure out, and I talked to Michael this morning about getting with Craig, make sure we have that written into the emergency action plan and stuff too, so it's not just up to Michael and me to remember what to do with it. And I think, we completed meetings with the cellular providers. Myself, several different council members, depending on the meeting, Public Works, Planning, a couple members of the Infrastructure and Public Works Committee. The good news is that they all want to improve coverage on Kiowa. The bad news is that it's kind of been known out there that, you know, don't call Kiowa because it's too hard. And I have experienced that myself when trying to put coverage on military bases because it got known as too hard, and so they take their money and they use it elsewhere. Kika was also part of those meetings. I should have mentioned that. Shannon and Jody came to one of them. So, you know, we're doing this in partnership to make sure that we can work with the providers. We're meeting with Crown Castle, who is the primary tower provider on Kiowa in a few weeks. We've met with them before, kind of hitting multi-prong, you know, getting all the cats herded in the same direction. The cell companies don't own towers. They lease space off of other towers. So we're going to be exploring what it takes to fast track getting better coverage, not only coverage footprint, but the speed. Most of the coverage on Kiowa is LTE. If that's, you know, either you lose coverage when you're driving or it takes forever to download a web page. That's because we're on LTE, we're not on 5G. But the cell companies are willing to bring 5G and seal up some of those seams. One of the things we're going to have to consider is perhaps taller towers. You know, the coverage comes from tower height. Joanne Hennessy from the Planning Commission also participated in the meetings. So we're going to discuss the next few weeks how we're going to assess that and consider that as an option to help improve coverage, not only for quality of life, but public safety. So more to come on that, but the good news is that everybody's motivated to help us. So we just got to figure out, how to make that all work and what that looks like as we go forward.
Thank you, Councilmember Farrell. Stephanie?
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. I just have just 3 updates. One, I just received word from Jim. So in regards to our culling process of deer, as you all know, that we typically donate the meat. And this year, we removed about 50 deer, about half and half, female versus male, and that amounted to almost 1,500 pounds of venison. And this year is going to be donated to the Little Rock Holiness Church. They're in Cottageville. So that's where that meat is going this year. And it's determined, we take it to our processor, and our processor, who has relationships with nonprofits, because we talked about it earlier, they're the ones who decide where it's going to go. Last year, it went to 2 locations. Additionally, just one other thing, I want to welcome a new employee that started today, Stephen Whitaker. He's our short-term rental compliance clerk. He'll be replacing Jan Fox. Stephen, some of you may know of him. He comes to us from Kiowa Island Community Association. So we're excited to have him on board. He started today. Ms. Jan Fox is retiring this month. She retires March 20th, and she would have served Kiowa, or been within the town of Kiowa Island for 27 years, either working with CBB part-time with the town, and then she came on full-time with the town. So we're going to be making that transition when she leaves us on March 20th, but Stephen is here now, training under Ms. Fox. That's it.
Thank you. Moving on to old business. First item of business is, as already referenced, second and final reading of the tree preservation and landscaping standards, ordinance 2025-02. Petrea, would you like to bring us up to date with changes from first reading and kind of where we stand in the process?
Yes, I did get a chance to meet with a couple of council members to go over some of the questions that were raised. The one change we have was a clarification under the applicability clause. It was a little confusing the way it read previously. So it reads now, the provision of this article apply to all real property within the municipal limits of the town of Kiowa Island, excluding single-family residential developments. However, the provisions of this article shall still apply to single-family residential developments which are not subject to review or purview of any established architectural review board. And that was the only change made, but if I can answer any questions.
Any questions? I mean, we had extensive conversation about this, and we did
It's all long.
at first reading. The planning commissions also had extensive consideration. I just I guess at this point in time, I would entertain a motion for approval of the ordinance on second and final reading.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion?
So, Petrea, there's multiple pages that are marked up in red. There are multiple pages that are marked up in blue. Can you give us a quick synopsis of the significant changes that we should be aware of before we vote on this?
So the only change from first reading is that thing. What the red shows is the actual development of the landscape standards. The original ordinance, which was titled Tree Preservation and Landscape Standards, didn't have any landscape standards. So basically, we moved a few items over to the landscape items, like what's included in a landscape plan. And then we also moved the component about landscape from the parking into this ordinance, so it's all in one place. So that's basic.
So everything in red was what we approved on first reading. We had considered. It was essentially, everything in red is essentially the tree ordinance.
Everything in black was originally the Phase 1 tree ordinance, and everything in red is what has been added as the Phase 2, the landscape standards.
Which is what we approved on first reading, and the only change from first reading to second reading is the language
blue.
in blue on page 1 of 19 Exhibit A, which Petrea referred to.
Right.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments?
Thank you.
If there is no further discussion, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Petrea, it is approved unanimously. Second agenda item is consider approval of ordinance 2024-20. This is stormwater management practices. This is second and final reading, but we first need to go into public hearing. So could I entertain a motion to go into public hearing with regard to ordinance 2024-20?
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're now in public hearing. Are there any public comments regarding the ordinance? Hearing none, entertain a motion to return to regular agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. John, you want to discuss where we are with, it's been a long time. I would just note that we approved first reading of this ordinance back in July of last year. And just to kind of reset, the genesis for this was issues that had risen or identified by community members and others with regard to the site plans that were originally submitted now a couple of years ago for Ocean Pines and West End. The town had retained an outside engineering firm, Weston and Sampson, to review the site plans. They had made a number of recommendations for changes. Many of those reflected, as was referenced by Mr. Mancusi-Ungaro, Charleston County standards, which are significantly more robust than current DHEC requirements. And it was the view, I believe, at the town at the time was that we did not have the ordinance authority effectively to be able to impose or require the recommendations were be made by Weston and Sampson that in their view reflected best practices. The goal was then to put in place a regulatory framework within our ordinance, within the zoning code, to be able to essentially require best stormwater management practices with regard to any development activity on Kiowa Island. So that was the genesis of this. There's been some back and forth as to whether the original framework that was proposed was the most direct way to do that. We've continued to have discussions over the subsequent months, and that's culminated more recently in bringing to the council now the stormwater management review process for second and final reading. John.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm going to just briefly highlight a little bit of the timeline because this has been discussed for some time and maybe has eluded some pause before you guys take action or consideration today. And so this first was introduced to the Planning Commission back in May of 2024. As stated, that Planning Commission did review initial recommendation, and that initial recommendation in June was studied further, not until July. It made it to Town Council for our first reading. If you all recall, we did take a pause subsequently to that first reading approval for additional study regarding a broader scope of stormwater management and resiliency. We scheduled a workshop, and that workshop was a joint workshop between Town Council and the Planning Commission, which was held later that year in September. And so subsequently to that, there's been a lot of discussion on to what Mr. Mayor shared and the intent or the approach rather proposed ordinance itself in its simplest form. Number one, it allows now as far as the permitting process, an applicant to submit as part of their review, a stormwater management plan, and that particular plan will be similar to our other review procedures. They'll be required to narrate exactly how they're managing stormwater on their specific site. Following that, that review process is incorporated into the ordinance. What we have done as part of the changes before you for second reading is that those review standards, non-existing in our code today, will be now married to what Charleston County stormwater permitting standards are. And so the applicant would refresh their review to make sure that they're consistent with the Charleston County stormwater manual standards. The other thing that I would note that this ordinance highlights is that it provides the opportunity for third-party review, and so as part of the recommendation of this, that we've added that council consider that a third-party review be brought on for that specific nature for future reviews for stormwater specifically. That's the big summary of the specific changes for the ordinance. I can answer any sort of more detailed if you have any questions specifically of the ordinance itself.
I have more of a comment than a question. My understanding is that as we discussed this approach, we had come up with several different one-size-fits-all possible management of the problem. And this instead is a process now that will provide the applicant with a whole range of options to manage their stormwater. So I think perhaps you had some particular objections to mandates that this ordinance in its original form had placed on the homeowners. And I think what you guys have done is to try to resolve those by offering out a menu of various options.
Correct. And if I may add to that point, we met last week, myself, Councilwoman Kay, Mr. Iwan, and Mr. Babinick from the Planning Commission to kind of understand where we move forward next with some of the other tangential relationships regarding pervious surfaces. You know that ordinance has been in discussion. And so one of the things that, as part of that, whether or not Kiowa goes into specific standards of identifying more, I would use the word even more restrictive than Charleston County or what fits Kiowa's current infrastructure, that would be the next sort of scope to this endeavor of stormwater management for the island.
And my follow-up question on the meeting last week and on this ordinance was, who's going to be drafting? Who will be responsible for drafting that cafeteria, that menu of options? Will it be Planning Commission? Will it be the Planning Department?
So we've already started with a. Let me make sure I understand your question. You said menu of options regarding
The various options that are open to a homeowner in terms of managing their stormwater.
So that's built already into the Charleston County Stormwater Manual itself, so.
And we're just going to
We're just
adopt that?
referencing, so as part of this ordinance, you see Exhibit B, that's the entire reference to that document.
I'll just comment. You may recall when Mayor referenced a couple years ago, this stuff coming up, I was standing at the podium advocating for this and frustrated that we didn't have this in place. So I'm glad for the hard work and the collaboration across many entities led by the town to pull this together. I think it's really important. I've kind of become a fan of, it's not neighborly to give your stormwater to your neighbor. So I think that's kind of what this is accomplishing is, you know, you own your property, you got the right to develop, manage your stormwater in the process of that. So thanks for pulling this together.
Yeah, Mr. Spencer, I was going to bring up the same thing. One of the things that I'm very happy with is this current ordinance requires the applicant to show existing and proposed drainage flow patterns with a narrative basically saying how you're not going to negatively impact your neighbor. So important. So important.
John, I just want to clarify with regard to the issues that Mr. Mancusi-Ungaro raised. This does provide kind of clear statutory authority to apply both the DHEC and county standards. The reference to the county standards would mean the county standards that exist at any given point in time. So to the extent that the county standards are updated, we would be applying any county updated standards, not static ones approved as of this point in time. That's number one. And number two, to address the issue about whether we might have unique circumstances, we specifically provide the authority to develop additional town of Kiowa Island standards that may be supplemental to or in addition to those imposed by either DHEC or the county.
Correct. So as part of page 1, under the section 3 submittal requirements, you'll see in item 4, we've enumerated that any of those applicable standards of the Department of Environmental Service, as well as Charleston County's stormwater program, and then finally any other applicable town and Kiowa measures that may come.
And then to the point that Councilmember Kay mentioned, that would be work that would be done by the planning department, maybe in conjunction with review by the planning commission. We may or may not retain outside stormwater management consultant to assist in identifying any unique circumstances relevant to Kiowa Island and standards that might be applicable to that. But at least as of right now, we have a much more robust set of requirements that we can refer to than has been the case heretofore, absent this ordinance and the clear authority to establish these additional guidelines.
And John, I think if I remember reading this correctly in our meeting last week, this gives the town the authority to recoup costs for that third party as well, correct? Recoup costs for the third party review.
So on page 2 of 2, regarding the requirements for third party review, there is a, let me see what, item C, that the applicant shall be responsible for paying all fees associated with a third party review. So it's written into the ordinance.
Good, thanks.
We've gone beyond just questions to a little bit of discussion. I'm remiss, I've been reminded that in fact we do not yet have a motion on the table for approval of the ordinance on second reading, and I would entertain such a motion at this point.
So moved, please.
And second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much, John, for your hard work on this over a long period of time. First item of new business under tab 4 is discussion of the beach operations agreement for coastal expeditions and a beach operation agreement for tidal trails. I do see the CEO and founder of Coastal Expeditions here. Just a little background and context on this. And I do want to get council members' input on this. What you have here are 2 draft operations agreements. The town ordinance provides that there is no commercial activity is permitted on the beach,
Right.
unless the town, unless there is agreement to provide such commercial activities by the town. This is one of those instances discussing with the town attorney his view, and I think he may be on, that this is not something that actually requires town council approval. The statutory framework is the legislative branch has said no commercial activity unless approved by the town. The town is the administrative branch to implement the terms and conditions of that approval. What we're bringing, these are the proposed draft agreements, and we can talk about each one a little bit separately, but I certainly would value the input of council members with regard to these agreements. If there's a sense of the council that they would prefer to have these actually formally approved by council, we can certainly do that, but it's the town's attorney's view that that's not necessary. Just with regard to coastal expeditions, this one's a little bit, well, let's do the mentioned tidal trails first, and Stephanie can provide correct, accurate, and more up-to-date information. But Tidal Trails has been providing services on the island for some period of time, basically paddle boards and what the like, and surfboards, and they really don't do much on the beach. Maybe a little bit of the beach, mostly they drop off, and then people take stuff out. But nonetheless, it is commercial activities on the beach, so we're trying to formalize that. There is a nominal a franchise fee, operating agreement fee associated with that. The amount of money that is likely to be generated by this is de minimis, so this is more to conform with the ordinance requirements than anything else. Coastal expeditions, it's a little bit of a different issue. As you may be aware, there's a lot of activity on Sandy Point, at Sandy Point. A lot of activity. And Sandy Point, as those who are not familiar with, is part of Kiowa Island. It's a large beach area that's on the far eastern end of the island. So it's actually, you can practically only get there by boat. It is, you're not there very often. I haven't seen it very often, but if my understanding, and I have been out a couple of times, is that on nice summer weekends, there are dozens, if not hundreds of boats?
Hundreds, not dozens.
Hundreds of boats beached along Sandy Point. The issue is not so much those, although that presents its own set of issues, but commercial activities that are occurring on Sandy Point, because again, we have an ordinance that prohibits commercial activities unless otherwise approved. We became aware that the Dunlin Hotel was essentially advertising, I think they even characterize it, commercial trips to our beach. I think is the way they had characterized it. But anyway, we reached out to them, and their service providers is Coastal Expeditions, and many of you may know Chris. He's been around the island for a long time and led any number of different educational initiatives. But he's actually the service provider on behalf of both the HOA, I believe, at Kiowa River, as well as the Dunlin Hotel. And so we invited Chris to come in. He was amenable to working out an agreement to, basically specify that he's gotten approval, so met the ordinance requirements, basic conditions, the same kinds of conditions in some respects that we've imposed on other commercial activities on the beach, whether with resort, whether the club and others. And so that's kind of what these two agreements are all about. Again, the monetary aspects of these are very, very, very nominal. The principal purpose is just to make sure that we are conforming with town ordinances and that we have basic requirements and conditions in place. Stephanie, want to add anything else? So I would invite discussion. It's not on the agenda for formal approval, but I would certainly invite input, and we can make any changes. I can make any changes before we execute these.
Well, I have an overarching comment for both of them. The hours of operation for both contracts cite, the ending point is 7 p.m. I would suggest not saying a time, but rather 30 minutes prior to sunset or something like that, because certainly I don't think we want a boat out at Sandy Point at 7 p.m. at night. That's point number one. Point number two is I don't know if our ordinances include safety items or not for boats. I looked and I couldn't find it. But if we don't have an overarching ordinance requirement, we should have in here any of these tours that are being shuttled back and forth to Sandy Point. We must state that the boat has emergency medical information, communications for an emergency situation. And I personally would want to make sure the operator has a representative from the tour company there, rather than just doing a dropping off and coming back at some point in time, 2, 3, 4 hours later. That's something that I would like to see added at that. And with respect to compliance, when I've been out to Sandy Point, I have observed some people doing barbecues or cookouts. I'm not sure we want any tour operator we're going to have an agreement with to have that ability to cook on the beach. That should be excluded as well.
So I'm thinking sort of the same lines as Councilman Berner. I think before we reach any agreements with any operators, we need to decide how we want that beach, that area to be run and policed. What the hours are, what the activities are, if any, who's going to monitor it, how we're going to monitor it. Fire is certainly an issue, how far into the dunes are going to go, wildlife issues. It's the wild, wild west out there.
It is.
And that's what concerns me. And if, I could even see people coming and spending the night out there camping.
I can too.
And then you have a campfire, and then, I'm not the worst case scenario guy, but certainly fire could get out of control and the whole end of that island gets burned. So I think we need to maybe slow this a little bit and think about what we want that area to be. Do we want it to be commercial? Do we want it to be commercial for the general public? And if so, or just the island residents, and if whatever that decision is, then how we want to manage it, rather than entering into a couple of agreements as one-offs.
Yeah, I talked to Jim Jordan about this, because I could never get out to that end of the island. What did his experience with this look like? And he said it's been decades, forever, that people have been boating out to use that part of the island. My concerns focus primarily on the indemnification issues. I just don't want to bear any responsibility for accidents out there. But I think both Russ and Luke bring up really good points. I haven't thought about worst-case scenarios. And that piece of land, I guess, is so attractive that it could invite some worst-case scenarios. So maybe we should delay a little bit and include some additional limitations around what can be done.
Yeah, I want to have some sort of controls along what Luke said. Don't get me wrong, I've been out there a couple times. It's not that it's nefarious or anything poorly out there. I mean, everybody is really having a good time, but it just takes an accident. If somebody's cooking, it just takes an accident, and then
Okay, but yes, but what? That's what I'm trying to understand.
well, I think we should be explicit in saying what's not allowed. And we should be explicit that we have to decide whether we want a tour. If it's a tour, every tour I've ever been on, the tour operator never leaves us. So the tour operator should be there the entire time.
So all good points for, consideration. A couple things I guess I would note, and I would invite the town attorney to jump in on whether we are potentially onboarding liability issues that we would not otherwise have. And this reminds me a little bit, this is a digression to conversations we've recently been having about the short-term rental inspection program. The fact of the matter is that there are hundreds of boats out there. We are not currently monitoring or managing any of that for compliance with a variety of town ordinances, including prohibitions and going into the dunes. We
Mr.
don't
Mayor,
have, there is no practical way to enforce that with our beach patrol and our code enforcement officers, simply no practical way.
In the current circumstances, given our current resources and the current circumstances. So that's what I would like to say, is put a pause on this and let's think about what are the practicalities that we can and cannot do, and what do we want to allow given that those constraints?
So when you say put a pause on this, couple things. One, are we saying that bottom line is there are commercial activities, there are commercial operators, there's one, there's probably others. I don't think Chris wants to name names of others coming from, that are acting, and if we identify those, the intention was to reach out to them to require them to comply with the beach operations agreement. The reason this is before us is because we were explicitly aware of a particular entity that was performing engaged in commercial activities on the beach without approval, which is a clear violation of an existing ordinance.
All right, so I'm going to add on to that, Mr. Mayor, please. You mentioned something that we've been now noticed, we've acknowledged, we've been noticed, this event is ongoing. Putting aside what we want this tour operator to do or not to do, I'm going to take a little bit of a different path. What do we need to do legally to protect ourselves from something going wrong? We are aware there's a tour operator going out there right now. How do we protect ourselves from something going wrong?
That's what this agreement is intended to do. Mac, I invite you to jump in. It does have an indemnification provision, but we're not. He is on. This is to conform so they are not currently violating town ordinance. The only town ordinance that this agreement deals with is that the commercial activity can only be engaged in if approved, and we're approving it. And we are requiring, I believe, that this agreement requires the operator to comply with all town ordinances. So it's incumbent on the operator to comply with all town ordinances.
All right, let's hear from Matt.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to essentially say a lot of what the mayor just said, that this agreement is what provides us with protection. It's also necessary for them to operate on the beach, but it requires them to indemnify us. It also requires that they have, believe it has insurance provisions in here as well. Yeah, they're required to have commercial general liability policy, auto policies, comp insurance, etc. So this does protect us. And to the mayor's point, if we're going to inspect their operations or set up rules in this agreement as to what they can and cannot do, but we don't go out there and enforce it or inspect to make sure they're eating cooking, like that does open up a host of liability issues. The best way, I think, if we do want to set guidelines and parameters for commercial activities on the beach, the best way to go about doing that would be in an ordinance so that it applies to everyone as opposed to doing it in individual contracts like this.
All right, that makes sense.
And one thing we should know is that whether we like it or not, the areas below the mean high tide line are public. That's the beach that's below mean high tide land is state-owned land. We can regulate it, but it is any person is entitled to being on the public beach. If they can get there by water, if they can't get there by land, which they can't on Kiowa Island, they're entitled to get there by water and utilize that beach. We can't stop them from doing that. We can pose reasonable public health and safety restrictions on that activity, which is what we do on the rest of Kiowa Island, but we have beach patrol and code enforcement officers to be able to do that. We simply don't have the resources right now. I would question whether we would ever have the resources or want to come up with the resources to try to deal with that. But at least this is a step in the right direction to at least those that are engaging in commercial activities, to require them to at least do the things that have been outlined that were noted by Mac.
My questions are kind of a different tact. I was wondering, I'm familiar with the umbrella and the chair and all that, and you see that going on through the season. I guess my question is more, what's additive to this agreement that didn't exist before? And I'm a little confused, and maybe it's just simpler than I'm allowing.
One quick answer is there was nothing before. Nothing. They were just commercial act, whether it was coastal expeditions or others that are coming from other places, are simply carrying out commercial activities on the beach without any kind of agreement in violation of the town ordinance. So this is a process to begin to at least provide some basic oversight, understand who's doing it, and then putting in basic protections for the town with regard to those activities, but not opening ourselves up to potential liabilities by over-regulating.
And I guess I'm just wondering, terminology-wise, what's private charter service, what's boat-to-beach trolley service exclusive to Denland, what's an educational beach tour. I'm picturing, somebody with an umbrella, stay with me. I don't normally see that on the beach, so is it describing them ferrying people out to Sandy Point? Is that what one of these is? I just don't know what these terms mean.
But Chris can certainly describe what he does. Roger? Yes.
I actually have two questions.
Yeah.
Would you liken this more to the franchise agreements that you've given people to do beach chairs and everything on the beach? Or is this something new that, since it's a commercial operation, can we also get a commercial agreement to do the same thing, since we don't do it now out there at Sandy Point, but we'd like to? Does that allow us to do it then?
Well, you could certainly, you could approach the town with regard to a proposal to conduct commercial operations on Sandy
As long
Point.
as we met the same
Yeah,
criteria.
yeah, yeah. But Chris, please come up and describe what it is you guys do. Understand that, this is kind of the first one that's been identified. Chris is actually essentially not so much volunteered. Not sure they were quite aware of the ordinance requirement, but when so apprised, was very forthcoming. Putting it kind of crassly in some respects, he might look at this as a competitive advantage to others to say, right now, he's the only authorized commercial operator. Okay. But to the extent that others are identified, then, we'll certainly reach out to those companies as well. And if if we have evidence that they're operating on the beach without a license or operating agreement from the town, we can certainly impose fines on them. But
You need to think about restrictions so that it doesn't get overrun.
so that kind of raises my issue. At what point there are literally hundreds of boats right now that we're not doing anything about.
They're individual boats.
Yeah,
They
the
look
vast
private.
majority of them are individual
Yeah.
boats. Whether they are actually violating other ordinances, for example, having dogs off leash when it's not when it's supposed to be on leash season, when they're actually going in the dunes or not, we don't know. As a practical matter, there's not a lot we can do about that. My hope is someone like Chris, who's a good steward of the environment, not willing to necessarily name names, but I suspect if you saw some really egregious activity, you'd be probably willing to let the town know.
We have a history of it.
So,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, thank you, council, for having this discussion. I appreciate your time and your energy. Ms. Tillerson has been so good through this whole process. I know she's very busy, and we've been like, well, what about this, and what about this? And she's right back with us and has sort of guided us through. I'd like to introduce Coastal Expeditions to start off with. We were founded in 1992, and in 1994, we got the concession for group services inside Cape Romaine National Wildlife Refuge to provide the Bulls Island ferry service. So that's sort of been our tenure of moving people by power vessel and getting the relationships with the United States Coast Guard on vessels that have a certificate of inspection, and you have to have that if you're going to move more than 6 people at a time. And we also have so that's a federal contract that we still hold. And we also are the ferry service to St. Philip's Island through the state SCPRT, which is Ted Turner's island that he sold to the state of South Carolina. We also offer ferry service there. And we have a lot of experience doing this sort of thing. And so we've been doing it for over 30 years. And what I've learned in well, first of all, I'm Chris Crowley. We do have a store on Southerly Way at Kiowa River on Johns Island. My home address is Allendale. I live at 6485 Come About Way in Allendale. And that's where I live with Carrie and my 2 daughters. I have an 11-year-old and a 6-year-old. So I think that's important to introduce yourself like that, right? We don't do anything but environmental education. All of our tours and all of our mission forward activities through Coastal Expeditions and the Coastal Expeditions Foundation are environmental education. We don't do booze cruises. We don't do bachelor parties. We don't do fraternity parties. We don't do anything like that culturally. We turn that business down. We don't even refer them to anyone. We just don't do that business. We don't take people out on the 4th of July to get intoxicated and shoot fireworks, or even take people out just to see the fireworks. We do environmental education. Our primary client, probably 75% of our business are school groups. As a matter of fact, today, this very day, we took out the first Title I school group out of our Kiowa River location. And it was the first time some of these kids had ever seen a dolphin. It was the first time some of these kids had ever seen the beach. And this is from, do you know where Mount Zion School is? Well, they're a Title I school on River Road. So if you had to drive here from elsewhere, you may have driven right past that school. And I'm proud to say the Coastal Expeditions Foundation was able to offer that trip as a scholarship event for these kids that live right by it but don't have the means to take advantage of it. And that's really, and it's funny that it's today, that happened today. And I sent some pictures of the trip so you could have them and share them with council if you so choose. I am the CEO of Coastal Expeditions and the executive director of the Coastal Expeditions Foundation. And I'm very amenable to getting in a relationship with the town of Kiowa. I would have some suggestions on the operation agreement that I have in front of me here, small suggestions and something for consideration. I understand if the attorney has better advice for council on what's best for the town, but this is something that the Sandy Point, like my neck of the woods is Cape Romaine National Wildlife Refuge. That's where I am. That's where my kids grow up and that sort of thing. I am aware of the far eastern end of Kiowa Island at Sandy Point and have been for years because there's a very important, one of only 5 very important bird nesting sanctuary there at Bird Key Stono. And that's a lot of my life work is seabirds and shorebirds and working with state and federal officials to bolster their habitat so they don't go extinct as these water levels rise. The Coastal Expeditions Foundation was largely responsible for the rebuild of Crab Bank Island in Charleston Harbor. And the coyotes, I'm so pleased to hear about your effort with the coyotes because the coyotes coming from Kiowa have spoiled the nesting efforts of the pelicans on Bird Key Stono for the last 2 years. So I'm like thrilled that you've captured and professionally harassed them. I think we should move them away in sake of the birds. I'm pro-bird, bird before coyote, but there are plenty of coyotes. My point is that's how I know that end of the island is from doing educational stuff and mission work on Bird Key Stono. And it sounds like a couple of you know what hundreds of boats look like on the 4th of July at Sandy Point. And I've been out there and seen commercial operators. I don't know if they have a license. I don't know if they have what, but they make trips and drop people off and they have on the same t-shirt as the other guy and they're obviously doing commercial activity. I do, the Stono Marina is right there, or the Sunset Cay we used to call it, and there are commercial operators leaving out of there. The beach is just, what we figured was it's below the high tide line and that was public domain. But I do agree that the OCR 40-year setback is within your jurisdiction, it's within your requirement of stewardship. And I'm happy to comply with that agreement. So completely compliant, but the things that you have stated so far that you fear, you don't have to fear from me. You don't have to fear from my outfit, my organization. We're not planning on making fires. I think that would be like cooking on a hibachi or grilling out or something. We're not going to do that for good reason. I don't want to catch the island on fire. I've seen that happen on Capers Island, out of control fires, and I don't want to have any part of that. I thought the hours of operation was a great one, Councilman Berner. That was on my list too. It was like not hours, but time of year, because the sun sets sooner now than it will in a month. So that would be something I'd say sunrise to sunset or something like that much more reasonable way to state that as opposed to set hours. But that end of your island is being used by recreational traffic primarily, but also by commercial traffic. But the recreational traffic, the things that happen in the summertime here are off the hook. And if it were going to burn down, it would have burned by now. It seems like the 4th of July, it's just, here's what I promise you. If you're looking for me, don't look out there on Labor Day, Memorial Day, 4th of July, Saturday, because I'm not going to be there because you can't do a good educational tour on those days. It's just, you can't do it. It's not even PG-13, with bathing suits these days. But, so we won't be out there then because it doesn't fit our culture and our model. It isn't what we're trying to introduce people to. So that being said, we are a good influence. We had a situation in Cape Romaine where they wanted to keep us off the beach with school groups during Wilson plover nesting season. And Wilson plover is a state endangered bird and it's currently threatened. And they thought that our dropping people off on the beach was interfering with their nesting process. And this was one where we'd drop people off, we'd provide a naturalist, but the Bulls Island Ferry holds 49 people and one person on the beach isn't going to be able to keep track of 49 people all at once. And what they found was nesting numbers, and we said, okay, what, birds first, wildlife first? And we didn't go, and the Wilson's nesting numbers declined that year because our presence wasn't there. Like, we police with our presence. We're naturalists. We care about the birds. We know about the sea turtles. We've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in the Sea Turtle Project in Cape Romaine over the years. So our presence on the beach is, it is a good thing. It's like peer influence. It's not policing, but certainly I would and have reported wrongdoers. It's just, I just can't stand it. I'm very passionate about our natural lands and our wildlife. So this particular operator, that's who we are. And I'm happy to answer any questions specific to programming. You have a lot of program names there that are from an offering slate through the resort, the Auberge Resort that is at Kiowa River. So I'll stop with that part. If I think I've said enough, I hope you understand who we are and what we do. We're a conservation organization, and that's what we do.
Chris, one thing, you mentioned that you had a couple of other suggestions. I thought we'd had some back and forth on the language of this agreement, that there had been back and forth, that we'd reflected, what any issues or concerns you have. If you do have others, again, this hasn't been executed yet. We can certainly continue to tweak this. Your suggestion, Councilmember Berner's suggestion on doing sunrise to sunset or something equivalent is, I think, appropriate. Another thing, and I invite Mac's view on this, the Councilmember Berner raised, when we're looking at the compliance provision, operator must comply with all Town of Kiowa Island ordinance. I think we could have a provision in there that the operator certifies that they comply with all other relevant federal and state regulations as well. Is that? I mean, we could, again, Mac, we're not getting into that business, but we're simply saying they have to certify that they do that.
That makes sense. That's a good suggestion.
Okay.
That the U.S. Coast Guard, Department of Homeland Security goes over our boats, every single one of our boats, with a fine-tooth comb on a regular basis. All of our boats have a COI, or Certificate of Inspection, and that's because we carry they're all capable of carrying more than 6 people at a time. A much easier way to operate would be on a bareboat charter business or a 6-pack, and those operations don't require any inspections at all, but you do have to hold a merchant mariner's credential that is a captain's license. That's at minimum a 6-pack captain's license, but all of our drivers, all of our operators have a master's license of 25 tons or better, which is over and above. We're all Coast Guard certified master captains with CPR, first aid. We pass mandatory drug screens. We're lifeguard certified. We all go swim in the pool. And we're also kayak instructors.
So Chris, in the month of July, I'm picking that because then nesting will be over. So the concerns with red knots and such would be done. What would a typical tour be out at Sandy Point?
In July, so the heat of the summer, that's something that would happen outside of the framework of the predictable afternoon thunderstorm. So it would be something that happened sort of in the morning prior to 1 o'clock or in the afternoon, probably after 4 o'clock or something like that. I would imagine the wind in July would be from the southwest. So if Sandy Point were the chosen beach to land on, depending if it's like a cruise and beach drop for a Dunlin client, for a hotel client, then it would, then it could be taking them out there and they would set up some chairs and umbrellas and just enjoy the beach.
Okay, so that, I brought that up intentionally, so you would do a drop-off just for hanging out on the beach rather than just environmental. That's why I was bringing it up July.
Yeah, the way out there, the narration, the naturalist guided aspect of it.
Got it, okay.
What we historically, part of our culture is there's somebody there that is available to the client if they want it, right? So if you don't want it, if you're with your friend or your partner or whatever, and you'd rather not have naturalist service, then you don't have to avail yourself to it, but the naturalist is present. If you want a naturalist guided beach walk, and we'll tell you all about loggerhead sea turtles and the things like that.
Got it.
But if what you want to do is sit with your feet in the sand and look out at Bermuda,
Okay,
then we're certainly not trying to stand between you and Bermuda.
great. That's a good answer, thank you.
So you do contract with Dunlin, for instance?
We do have a service contract with the Dunlin, with the Auberge Resort, that is the Dunlin at Kiowa River, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so scope of that could be just transport, or it could be transport and presentation?
All of our transport includes presentation.
But once ashore?
Oh, once ashore? The Dunlin's such a high-end sort of resort. They don't, and really, I'm trying to think of I think I know where, I think I understand the question. And we always drop a naturalist off on the beach with the client. Sometimes there's so many clients, like on Bulls Island when we go out there, or Morris Island or Crab Bank Island before it's closed, that the person we drop on the beach, the ratio is like 1 to 35, you know, because people enjoy, and they can take advantage of the naturalist guided portion of it with the professional or not, but there is someone there policing the group if we see someone acting poorly, but they get the briefing before they get off the boat. It's sort of a repeat after me sort of thing. Don't go in the dunes, right? What are you gonna not do? Go in the dunes. That's correct, that kind of thing.
Do you allow dogs to go out with these?
Dogs?
Do dogs ever go out on these expeditions?
You know, we love dogs, but we're not but the dog, again, like the birds beat the coyotes. They also mean, and I love coyotes too, but not as much as I love the birds. There's plenty of coyotes. The birds are actively going extinct as we speak. So we don't take dogs. No, ma'am, there are no dogs ever.
Yes, Mr. Warren?
I have to go up there. I just want to ask a question. I'm confused. Under what circumstances is it okay for a commercial property like the Dunlin to set up tours to Kiowa Island out at Sandy Point? Is it privately, do we own that end of the island?
Who's the we?
The town.
The town doesn't own that. It's not. Yeah, it's within the town limits, and the town has regulatory jurisdiction over all areas from the mean high tide line or from the OCRM line to seaward, as well as police authority 1 mile out.
So would you consider a normal occurrence then that somebody commercially would contract with a commercial vendor to take people from their commercial property to this property out here without at least notifying you that they were going to do it? Because I assume by the looks on your faces that you didn't realize that they were doing that.
That is why we are where we are now, because we became aware, we were notified.
Contact the Dunlin yet?
Yes.
And what was their response?
Well, the Dunlin actually
Never talked to Dublin. We contacted Dublin, but we also contacted Coastal Expedition. And so we've then been working through this with Coastal Expedition. Working on behalf.
He's a middleman now on the deal?
Yeah, because Donlin pays them to do the work. And so they're the ones operating the commercial, we're looking at it as they're the ones that's actually operating. Donlin is just paying them to provide that service to their guests.
Understand my concern about competition in this situation, and that a competitor is allowed to, just come over to our island?
Well, they were doing so in violation of the town's ordinance. That's what we're trying to address, is a commercial, an agreement, approval of the town is necessary in order to conduct commercial activities on the beaches within the regulatory jurisdiction of the town. So that's why we are here at this point.
Chris, are they charging their guests for your services?
Are you in competition with the Dunlin? Like, do you have a captain's service that you do?
We do.
Who is that with?
We have people who are captains on our staff, and we also have outside. But what my question is,
For who though? What's the
let
organization?
me ask my question first, okay? If you're available to do it, I don't want them. We'll hire you, and we use you for things here for us the same way. I know I'm being very selfish, and I understand that you have to run your town the way you want to. I'm just making a statement that I don't like it.
He's with
But
Keel
you can-
Island Golf Resort.
Kiowa Island Golf Resort.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Chris, I'm president of the resort.
Yes.
Great. I just didn't know. I was like,
Sorry,
hey, I'm not trying to like step on anybody's toes. I'm not trying to be the
No, and I'm not trying to criticize you.
guy.
Don't
Got
get me
all sorts of hands. This is, I never thought we'd get such a, but hands in the audience. Yes, back here, then to Phil.
So last year, the Dunlin had contacted us, I'm Trevor with the Beach Service, about staking off an area at the beach and setting up their chairs and umbrellas for their guests. I told them that there was no way that Roger or any other entity would allow any other entity to come out here free and take advantage of their beach.
And just to make it not personal, because we have franchise agreements, and we all have those with the town, and they're protective of that. So we're all protected by the same franchise agreements.
And that's exactly what this process, because it has been the Wild West on Sandy Point. So this is the beginning of the process to try to get a modicum of control over that, at least with regard to commercial activity, since that's what clearly violates the town's ordinance without an agreement.
I understand what you're saying, and 200 boats that are out there, there's just one of you doing your tour, so I would group at any one time, basically. Well, because I'm confused about controlling commercial with one agreement. Are there other commercial people out there dropping off people on that same area?
We understand there are. We haven't yet identified those. To the extent that you or anybody else can help us identify those, and we have some evidence that are engaged in commercial activities in violation of the town's ordinance, we will certainly reach out to them just as we did with Dunlin and Coastal.
I would make one last comment, and I won't say anything more. We appreciate your same support that you've done with the franchise agreements for beach chairs on the island out at Sandy Point.
Yeah, Roger, I agree with you. And I still think I think this is a bigger discussion than one operator. And again, I appreciate everything you're doing and saying and the way you do it. Let's recast this discussion. Let's say that there were 200 boats pulling up on the beach in front of the sanctuary. How would you think about that? There are some individuals and two operators. Are we just going to go after the two operators and talk about policing that? Or are we going to think about, now that we know there's 200 individuals in front of the sanctuary on the beach, Is that a
I mean,
problem?
we have you have beach patrol patrolling that area. We have town code enforcement officers that can get to that area.
I don't need an explicit answer, but that's the way I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking about this holistically, about the island of Kiowa. Not just this end place down here, but if you treat this one way, you'd have to say, we're going to treat the whole beach the same way. Unless you make an explicit decision, we're going to treat separate pieces of the beach different ways. And I'm not sure that, I mean, if you think about it the way I think about it, the beach in front of the sanctuary is a beach for the sanctuary guests and the residents of Kiowa and the tourists. It's not a public beach where a boat should pull up. Why is that different over here, just because it's a remote area?
In fact, I believe, Matt can correct me, but by state law, you can't, under ordinance, beach the boat. But if you anchored offshore, you are entitled to do that. Chris, is that correct?
But we've seen pictures, Mr. Mayor, we've seen pictures of 200 boats beached around this point, so
Okay,
it's the
but
same
I'm
issue.
trying to figure out then, yes, there's hundreds. We don't have the resources to deal with that. So what then? That's what I'm trying to figure out. What then?
We don't have the resources to deal with 200 boats parked in front of the sanctuary.
Where's the sanctuary exactly?
It's right in the middle of,
It's right
in the middle of the beach, yeah.
Yeah, you could land a boat at the sanctuary. You could land 200 boats at the sanctuary, and you'd have to walk away from every one of them because landing on the beachfront of a barrier island like that is like, it's so dangerous that you're going to lose your boat. Like you're
No,
not.
not here.
What's that?
Not here.
Eventually, or people be doing it.
I still don't quite understand
What I'm trying to say is, I think we need a holistic thought process around the beaches and Sandy Point in particular, because this activity is happening, and we don't have the resources to manage it, but that's not an excuse for us not to manage it. Maybe we need resources. So we need a I think we need a comprehensive approach to this area of the beach as well as all of it. And for me, it's a resource of the town and a resource of Kika and the resort and other places that I think needs management.
We can certainly consider whether we substantially enhance contracts with the Beach Patrol, we do some other contract, or we get more code enforcement officers that are spending every day or simply every weekend day, all day long on Sandy Point Beach. We can certainly do that, but I'm still not sure how that precludes, why that would suggest that we not, at least with regard to this commercial operator that we know, have an agreement in place that they're willing to enter into where we get indemnification, we get certifications, and we get insurance, et cetera. And so this is the beginning of a process that we could put in place with others. I don't know why one precludes the other, or they're mutually exclusive.
I don't think it's reasonable to, while I agree with what Mr. Farrell is saying, I don't know how the hell we're going to enforce it to begin with.
Well, we'd have to do something different. Maybe you hire,
Significantly
you have a beach down there, you have a boat down there, and the guy collects tickets and he charges everybody $5, or there's a way to do it. I mean, other places certainly do it. That's what I'm talking about. I think we need to think creatively and holistically about this. I mean, charging this gentleman a fee for doing it and not charging the other 200 boats for grounding their boats doesn't seem fair to me.
Well, but that's because he's operating a business and collecting revenue, and everybody else is a private guy. That's the difference.
We are commercial. We are generating.
That's the difference.
We are generating revenue by using the town property that you're in charge of. You know, albeit we're below the high tide line. I'm not even trying to talk about that. I'm happy to comply. I mean, I agree with your OCRM setback regulation and a mile out. I think that's spot on the money. And all of those things. I'd love to be allowed to land on that beach with groups. If you guys could figure out a way to allow that, that would make it easier for me. It's just further for me to go to the next beach. But we'll stay off the beach as long as you want us off the beach. And if you put somebody out there charging tickets to 200 boats, you're going to have a a riot on your hands from
Yeah.
all of the island of Folly Beach and everybody else.
We'll be on the
So
first page of the Post
I'm
and
not
Courier.
sure that's what you want for Kiowa Island.
Right.
That's the kind of press you want, but
Right.
there are other outfitters out there, or other operators out there that are operating for hire, that are under your radar, that you don't know about. Perhaps you get some information about those, who knows? But in any event, maybe you vet your outfitter. Maybe you come make them stand at this podium and tell you who they are. I'll tell you this, we currently have a business license on the town of Kiowa. You're currently named as a listed insured on our very robust federal insurance policy. All of the things that would take to comply with this, aside from, I think it needs my signature to prove indemnification. But all of the things that you've requested have been put in place. When I came here, I thought we were gonna have a chat about this paperwork, and then I didn't realize that there were people that had existing contracts that felt like this was competition. I didn't realize that it was gonna be, we were gonna be talking about burning Sandy Point down. I thought it was gonna be a different sort of meeting than that.
Is this an environmentally sensitive area?
Oh, yeah.
Actually,
yes.
Oh, yeah.
so, I mean, we can just say no trespassing because it's
Well,
environmentally sensitive.
a question
Actually,
for Matt.
you can't. Mac, correct me if I'm wrong, but any person has the right, the beach below the mean high tide line is state-owned property. Anybody can be on that beach. We cannot restrict, what we can do is restrict certain activities. We can't restrict somebody from being on the beach. Now, our ordinance does say, in addition to commercial activities, no beaching of a boat. So we could arguably cite somebody if they beach the boat, but if they anchor it 2 feet off the beach in the water and hop
I
in,
understand
they
that.
are entitled by state law to be there.
But I brought up the environmental sensitivity because there are islands around where Sandy Point is that have signs all over them, no beaching, environmentally sensitive area.
There's state heritage preserves,
Yeah.
like Bird Key Stoneup.
Well, then we would have to, I guess, I don't know. Matt's outside my bailiwick whether we could apply for that area to be, so designated by the state, in which case that's a wholly different matter.
Right.
And that may be something that's worth looking at.
And there are other places, you say they could anchor 2 feet off the shore. I know of other places, maybe not in South Carolina, where you can't anchor within 300 yards of the beach, where they're true beaches.
All I'm
there's-
saying is that's not what our ordinance simply says you can't beach. I don't know how you define you can't beach a boat. That's all our ordinance
If we have
says.
jurisdiction out a mile.
Yes, we do.
Then we could say you can't anchor within 300 yards of the beach in a future ordinance. Yeah, I think this gentleman is doing a great job. I don't want anything to be confused here. I would like to grant him an operator's license to go out there. I'd like for he and Roger to be the only 2 people who could go out there. My issue is with the other 200 people who, we don't know what they're doing. We don't know if they're environmentally sensitive. They haven't paid their $12 or $5, whatever. And I'm concerned about the worst-case scenario out
All
there.
right, Ken, so I'm gonna.
Right now, we're doing nothing. So we're
Yeah,
starting,
yeah. But now we know.
We're starting to do
Excuse me,
something.
Matt, is it possible to draft some kind of ordinance that, that cites the environmental sensitivity of this part of the island and to construct a bunch of. Sorry. Oh, boy. Mac, did you hear anything I said?
Yeah, you said, is it possible to draft an ordinance?
Yes.
Noting the environmental sensitivity, then I think you stopped.
Right, and that would also address some qualifications on the part of any operator of any kind of excursion service that would be really, what's the word? That would be so onerous that very few people could meet them, and thus limit the number of folks that we could authorize, or that we would have to authorize to operate this kind of service.
Still goes back to enforcement.
Well, if we made
I
the
think the big
criteria
question's
strict
enforcement.
enough,
We certainly could draft an ordinance that has pretty strict requirements about what you need to run a commercial outfit out there.
I can't hear
Whether
him.
it's first aid certifications, captain's licenses, et cetera. But that's certainly something we could do.
We could do either that by ordinance or by agreement, because right now, the ordinance simply says, unless approved by the town, and the town has essentially latitude to develop whatever set of conditions, but those could certainly be embodied in an ordinance if we want to do that.
I mean, stuff like having master, what did you guys call them? Your master captain license, we could include that as one of the criteria. We could include environmental commitment to the actual content of the excursion. We could have some
The
kind of
environmental education
environmental
side of it.
education.
There's a river.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, let me be clear. I am wholly in favor of this gentleman having a license to do what he's doing.
Let's vote.
I'm wholly in favor of Roger having the ability to do the same thing, give environmental tours out there. If they want to stay for a couple hours and all of that is great. I'm going to pound the table about the other 200 folks who we don't know what they're doing. They're using our resources and it's unpoliced, and so there's a lot of liability out there.
So what I hear from Chris is
There
that.
actually isn't. I think Matt can correct that. Right now, there
There's no
really
waves, there's
isn't
nothing.
any
It's
liability.
Right, but you're saying basically there's
it's
you, and then there are a
Kiowa
couple of
River, there's
ad
no
hoc other excursion companies that might be wearing the same T-shirts. So it's a hint that they're operating some kind of commercial enterprise, but they're not
They're not
fully
you.
formed and logistic and as organized as you are. So we've got probably of 200 boats, you've got 180 of them that are individuals, and then we've got you, and then we've got a couple of these ad hoc.
Yeah, I mean, my guess is that there may be 4 others or maybe half a dozen. And then the opportunistic folks that are like, yeah, I'll run you out there for
Yeah.
$100, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
What I saw when I was out there, a beautiful day, and this walk around Grady kept coming back and forth with 6 people at a time. So it made me think that guy's got a license. And he and his mate had a yellow T-shirt on, and they were dropping people off, and it was like a party. It was a party, and you could tell they were commercial. They were getting paid to do it, and then they were taking people back. They were like running a shuttle from somewhere to somewhere.
Right, and picnic supplies and
it was
beach chairs.
and it was an adult fun, and they weren't off the hook. It wasn't anything I would want to do for me culturally, but they weren't like, they didn't have dogs. They weren't lighting fires in the
They
ditch.
did not have
anything
dogs.
like that. They did not.
I have observed dogs there, so you know, Madeline.
Okay,
Dogs run free out there.
We're not going to solve
Not
all.
going
We're
anywhere
not going to
with this.
solve all this now. So one thing, if we want to take a broader look in the context of our Beach Management Act, we are looking at rewriting our Beach Management Act. We want to have the combination of the Environmental Committee and Public Safety Committee to work together on something that's of broader applicability and scope. I think it's worth taking a look at, but I'm still not sure at the end of the day that it's been going on for decades, that all of a sudden we want to build up a large infrastructure to try to enforce or regulate activity that's been going on for a long time. We can, but that requires a fair amount of infrastructure and regular enforcement. Once we start down a path, that's when we start introducing, when we establish rules and regulations, and then we kind of only half-baked, in a half-baked fashion, enforce them, is where we start getting into issues with regard to arbitrary and capricious activities, potential liability concerns.
All right, so what happens with Chris now next month?
So, but that's the second point I was going to get to. There are a couple of good tweaks, and I am certainly willing to onboard those, and Stephanie and I can work with Chris on those. But my intention would still be, unless I get a clear indication otherwise from the council, is to go ahead and sign this particular agreement because it puts us in a good place with a particular operator. To the extent that there's somebody else that wants to enter into a similar agreement, then that's something that they should bring to the town for approval. And like with this, once we get more information, just like our other beach operations agreements for just non-water-based commercial operations on the beach, all those agreements are up in another year or so, and we're going to take a fresh look at those collectively to make sure it works for the commercial operator as well as it works from the town from a public health and safety standpoint.
What's the duration of this agreement?
This one may be.
It's a year to be renewed in the spring.
Yeah, it lines up with the other ones. Yeah. So again, that would be my intention, is to go ahead and put in place what, reflecting some of the comments and a couple of additional provisions. Otherwise, I guess we could just say, Chris, never mind. We're not going to order this. Continue to do what you're doing. You're violating the town ordinance, and maybe we'll decide to, enforce that against you or not.
For that record, I know that ignorance is no excuse, but I did not realize we were violating a town ordinance. And had I known, I wouldn't have. And as soon as we did know, we stopped.
Yes.
And we have not, and we told the Dunlin, take it off, take it down. We're not offering it anymore. And that's what I'm here to do, is just comply. And perhaps this is an important first step in getting started fathoming the Wild West, and I'm proud to represent the brand and the culture and what we would offer in this relationship with you. We are not the police, but we are there, and we are a positive influence on the 200.
And I appreciate, on behalf of the town, the good faith nature in which you've approached this.
If there's we're complicit. If you guys, if Mr. Farrell, if you wake up tonight and go, there's that thing, and if it's something, then.
Okay.
No, I also appreciate you coming forward and asking to do the right thing and have been doing the right thing and educating us about this. And I'm very positive on doing this. I'm just thinking the bigger pictures, what concerns me. I have no fear that you're going to start a campfire or having people throwing beer cans in the dunes. That doesn't bother me. It's everybody else that's I'm concerned about.
Maybe this is an important first step in moving in the right direction. I'm not sure.
So that would be my intention. We'll sit down with Chris, address any other little issues, make a couple of these additions that have been suggested, and still go ahead and execute this agreement. At the same time, I would encourage a combination Environmental Committee and Public Safety Committee to perhaps set up a working group or task force of those to look at issues with regard to Sandy Point. I do think we have to be mindful of, you said it, absolute chaos, and all of a sudden, if there were I think we need to be careful going down that path, because of all of a sudden we're out there trying to police hundreds of boats on weekends when they've been doing that for years and years. We're certainly going to get a lot of attention, but we can deal with that when it comes.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, I've seen that happen in McClellanville with the closure of the out islands in North Cape Romaine, and it was a public uproar. And maybe any press is good press. Maybe it brings some attention, and you divert that momentum into the proper direction. But I would volunteer this: if it's not a conflict of interest, as it may be, I'd be happy to consult or give my opinion. I've been doing this for most of my life. I've been doing this work, and I have a lot of experience in it. I know about it, and perhaps if my input would be of value, I'd be happy to loan it for free on this.
I appreciate that. And Stephanie, you referenced it. What's the state heritage area? What's, Krista, would you characterize it? Some areas are restricted. So notwithstanding.
I think it was Mr. Berner that said there's some islands you can't get off on. They got signs all over them, and they're 5 state heritage preserves from the Savannah River to Myrtle Beach.
So as part of this effort, might look at whether that's something that we can pursue and we might want to pursue with the state.
That'd be through the DNR.
Yes, I'll take a look into it, because I don't know if those are state parks, and so maybe that's something that they're able to do, but I'll take a look into it.
You have to have, it's like, I don't get to be Mr. Universe just because I'm available. Like, to be a state heritage preserve, you have to meet some criteria.
right.
And unfortunately, that,
I'll look into it.
I'm happy to put you in
Right.
touch with the person that knows how to do that at DNR.
So you talked a lot about kind of the educational aspect of your tours. If we beefed up the language in this to have it be realistic that all of your tours out there had some educational, some environmental component, would that be a problem for you?
I would love that. I would love to see that. I would be happier to sign it. And I do think whatever operator that you have, this is sort of like what I was saying about my opinion, if they were required to, like the Coast Guard requires you to brief your passengers on how to act when you're on board, where the fire extinguishers, throw rings, emergency signaling devices, and life jackets are. If there was the same kind of requirement as imposed by the operating agreement that had best practice, before you can put anybody on this beach, you have to say this, 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 and this. Don't go in the dunes. If you see birds on the beach, walk around them, let them rest, let them nest. If you see sea turtle tracks or anything like that, here's how to behave around those things. Like the best, leave it better than you found it, you know? Like bring back everything you took in one more, if there was a best practices list, is I'm about to let you go on the beach, but repeat after me. And then what you hope is if they knew better, they'd do better. And I'd love to do something with your Title I schools. The one we took out today isn't the only one within 20 minutes of here. But if we could, maybe we could do a program with them that had environmental education and took them out there to put up signs that said, let them rest, let them nest.
Well, so I was thinking about that. I saw down in number E, you do public beach sweeps and litter sweeps. Maybe that's a Title I school activity. You take them out there and.
That's the plan. Before they close Bird Key Stono on March 15th, we'll be out there with a service group. In this case, it'll be post-traumatic stress-affected veterans, and we'll clean that island off. So it's got all the fishing line and junk off of it so that baby pelicans have a better chance.
So, Mr. Mayor, I personally would be happy with you executing this contract in your administrative role. I would like to suggest that we do something like that to increase the environmental component to this contract. It gives him a competitive advantage, and it also sort of lays a stake into what we're trying to do is keep this an environmentally pristine area. And as we go forward, think about what we can do to make it environmentally pristine. And even if we have individuals out there that they're acting in the right way, they're supporting it, and it doesn't become a huge enforcement issue for us.
I just think off the top of my head, kind of applaud the concept or sentiment, but I'm wondering, Chris, you said, you know, if it's a family or a couple families that are staying at the Dunlin and they're not really interested in your narrative, but they still just want to go out there, does that mean Chris has to say, I can't take you because this is only an
They get, like, when they're stuck on board, when they're a captive audience, they get the introduction to the major building
They're gonna
blocks
get
of
the
the
narrative.
estuary, they get the 411. That's our job, and that's what they expect. They expect that sort of interpretation from us, and if they don't expect it, they will next time, because it's coming.
Brad?
Yes, Trevor.
It sounds like you do a great job. Is this driven on by you wanting to expand your business, or is it driven on by the Dublin wanting to get a foot on the island?
Thanks for that question. Like 8 years ago now, the Lou Hammond Group contacted me and asked me to come and sit down and talk to a representative, and that was a representative from John Darby's effort at Kiowa River. And we met downtown, and I think I got my ego involved. I was like, oh, me? Me? You want me to be your operator out at Kiowa River? And nobody had thought about the Dunlin. So I signed a contract with them after consulting and getting some pretty stern feedback from my mentors. Like Virginia Beach was the worst. And I love Virginia. I trust Virginia. But getting into business with the beach company, who is, has been perceived as the evil developer, wasn't really my brand center, my lane. But what I said was, I can stand on the sidelines and scream about this thing that's happening, or I can get in the game and start to try to change the score. And when I saw that they're building an environmental-based community, that is interested in the birds and the turtles and the wildlife and the creeks and the woods and all of that sort of thing. After, prayer and meditation, I decided to sign the lease at the waterfront there, that little building, and the Dunlin didn't come until much later. The Dunlin is struggling to do what they proposed to do. Like last year, all the business we did with the Dunlin was about $4,000. And they just can't, I don't want to talk ill of folks, but I hope that they could do better. I think they're struggling, but the Dunlin had nothing to do with my decision to join the effort at the Kiowa River community. That came later. That was a surprise. That just happened August of last year.
I'm thinking we should hire Chris to take us out there for a site survey so we can see what's really going on.
Free boat room.
Okay.
And get the
All right,
first captive
folks.
There
audience.
are comments in the audience.
I think that's a great idea.
I just have some observations, and Brad, you know my background. I've been an environmentalist my entire professional career, so this has nothing to do with what you're doing. I'm concerned about opening a slippery slope here. You're going to let an off-island resort use Kiowa Island to benefit them, which I understand the benefit is good from an environmental standpoint. I just looked at the website, and they do tours on Wednesdays and Saturdays into the salt marsh. I'm not sure what that refers to. But I'm just concerned that you're saying, okay, we're going to fix this problem by signing this one contract with one provider, when you have other people we know are out there. My son has been out there, I don't know how many times. Parties there on the weekends, on the weekdays in the summer. Thank God that sailboat is no longer there, because that was becoming a jungle gym. I don't know if you're aware of what I'm talking about, but there used to be a gigantic sailboat beach there. Everybody was swinging on the ropes from it just because it was fun. I just think you're really stepping ahead of looking at this from a big picture. I agree with Luke and that, Mr. Farrell, that you really need to look at this largely and what is the problem out there that we need to fix, and then how do we make it work correctly? But by just signing a contract with one commercial entity, when's the next one coming in? When's the next one coming in? You've opened the door and you're going to say no to somebody else and yes to him? I just think it's a little rushed here.
I pose the same question, Phil. I don't quite understand what the implication of that is. We've talked about this. Right now, there are a handful of commercial operators and hundreds of boats out there. Now, all of a sudden, everybody's saying, which I didn't even know about this until a couple of years ago. It's been happening for decades. Now everybody says it's a problem, and now we need a holistic solution. We're going to talk about a solution. Does that mean we don't do anything in the interim until we get to a holistic solution? I'm really struggling with this.
I agree with you. I think the issue, though, is by letting Chris start using it and signing a contract, have you now stepped past the issue that you really need to address first? And are you now allowing something to happen that will preclude you from controlling it in a more holistic?
I get what you're saying, but otherwise, the answer to that would be, never mind, Chris, just continue to do what you're doing and everybody else is doing until we figure this out, and there's nothing in place until we figure out the whole solution, which maybe is the right way to go. that's what.
No, Phil,
anyway,
I hear what you're saying, and so here's my thought process, because I'm thinking exactly like you. But if we sign a contract with him, and if we put some increased language in here that talks about an environmental, we start to define this as an environmentally sensitive area. Very slowly over the process, we've got to put in a lot of regulations and a lot of enforcement. But if you just say we're going to do nothing, that's the wrong answer. If you say we're going to give you a permit to do whatever you want to, then that's allowing everybody to do whatever they want to. But if we start to define this as an environmentally sensitive area in his contract, then you can go to the other operators and say, you're operating illegally. We can do it if you can do environmental sensitive. And if you can, great. If you can't, that's great too. But you can't operate.
Then you don't get an agreement.
And then you can start working on the public. Over time, you can work on the public and figure out how to do that.
That's the problem. It's not the operators, even the individual operators. There are parties that go on over there. They come over from Folly, they advertise them on the web.
But we know that, Phil.
Okay.
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 We need, David, can we move on? Yeah.
As an ordinance, you cannot beach a boat.
Right. That's a state.
He has to beach his boat to get the people off, unless they're gonna jump in 4 feet of water. So how can this contract violate that ordinance?
I guess when I think of beaching a boat, I don't think of, like, when we beach a boat, there's still water between us and the beach. Like, the boats don't go up onto the beach. When I think of beaching the boat, I'm thinking of like erosional issues, or what you do is, if you're gonna camp out there, you put the boat up on the land and let the tide
Our
go
ordinance
out.
simply says beach a boat, and it doesn't define that. So I would, if I were a boat operator, I'd say if there's any water between where my boat is and the beach, I haven't beached the boat.
As a professional captain, when you beach a boat, you're trying to work on the bottom. You're putting it up at high tide and letting the tide go out from under it, so you can do
Anyway,
maintenance work on the lower unit.
We're going to move on, folks. Thank you. A much more robust discussion than
Thank you for your
anticipated.
time. and that was a
Chris,
lot.
thank you for your patience.
I've got to get, I have to go to Lang to get Olivia from newspaper club.
Okay.
Am I next?
We're just going to start the.
Need agreement on this, or what do you need to do on this?
No, it's not, there is, I just said I was trying to get input, and if there was a clear sense one way or the other, I would be informed by that. So I do have some, action items, and we'll try to figure out whether may make sense to bring it up either for approval or additional discussion at the next meeting.
This was just discussion. This was not to approve or.
Well, again, but what I was saying is, this was a discussion item. It was as I announced, it was my intention that we were going to get some input, but go ahead and execute it based upon the input, either as it was presented, or if there were suggestions to execute it.
Right,
was
right, because the council said you can, so yeah, so let's move on.
But.
We spent enough time.
Okay. You can still, do you want us to hold?
No.
Okay.
The next thing is
The encroachment permitting process.
No, you can go right ahead and talk about that.
The next agenda items under tab 5, it's to consider approval of ordinance 2025-03 on first reading. It's an ordinance to establish basically an encroachment permitting process. A little background and context, and then I'll entertain a motion for approval on first reading. This arose in part because of some recent activity on the town's right-of-way. And I said, well, where's our encroachment permit? When did they file an encroachment permit, submit an encroachment? And, well, we don't have one. And I started looking at other municipalities, and they actually have encroachment permits. Kika has an encroachment permit. We do have a land disturbance permit, which is a zoning permit, but we don't have an encroachment permit. And there were 3 recent instances of not nefarious activity, but one was Kiawah Island Utility doing work in our right-of-way, actually took down a tree without kind of letting us know in advance or asking our permission. Kika was doing some work on Inlet Cove on one of the outflow walls, and we had just recently planted new landscaping, and they just kind of took the backhoe through that and took down the fence and all. So we reached out, and in both cases, they've done actually mitigation and repair, but there was kind of no advance notification, no requirement regarding that. Another one may recall that we not sure who it was, maybe Comcast or Xfinity, that was doing some work, again, without knowledge to us, and damaged one of our irrigation lines on Beachwalker Drive. They didn't do anything to repair it at the time. They just left it, and it just kept bubbling up. So again, and you can envision other circumstances, so this is actually to put in place a process that would allow for, require encroachment permits to be obtained, and depending on the nature of the work, require certain information to be provided to the town, the Director of Public Works. Anyway, with that background, I would invite a motion for approval of ordinance 2025-03 on first reading.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion or questions?
Yes.
By the way, we had added a couple of provisions that you had requested.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Exhibit A, item number 2, permit requirement, subparagraph E, talks about damage or inordinate wear and tear of various items. That's a really undefinable term, inordinate wear. It also discusses later on in this document on page 4 to replace item number E, to replace vegetation destroyed during application of this work. So what I'm proposing to do as part of the permit application, add a new subparagraph E that includes photos or perhaps a survey of the area that's going to be disturbed. So it's readily determined what plants have been destroyed, what damage to curbs have been performed, or whatever. Because without any photographic evidence, what happened when they paved Surf Song, when Kika did Surf Song, I observed damage to a curb by one of the mobilization efforts, and it never got fixed because they couldn't prove it. These before and after photos are, I think, important to substantiate damage that's done during any work.
That certainly seems fine with me. Is it, are you proposing, well, an amendment?
Well, no, what I'm proposing is what I said under permit application.
Well, no, I know, but
Yes.
we have, what's the motion is to
amendment, oh.
approve.
So you're right. Well, that was a
So you're
discussion.
proposing an amendment to the ordinance as drafted.
Yes, to add wording that would require during the permit application process to submit photographs of the locations where the work will be disturbing the existing infrastructure.
So I'm certainly amenable to that. I'd invite the town attorney to jump in. Would it be acceptable that I work with the town attorney to craft language that basically requires evidence, photographic and otherwise, of existing conditions prior to the work?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Exactly.
I don't see any problem with that.
Okay.
Is there a permit cost?
There is no permit cost based in the ordinance. There certainly, just as we do with all our licensing and permitting fees, we could require by regulation a permit cost, a permit fee.
I think we should require a permit fee. I don't know what it should be. John is not here.
You, I mean, it is a permit in a form and in manner, and we could specify, I don't think it would be necessary, but Mac, your always view is it's better if it's in the ordinance rather than not specified such reasonable fee as may be determined by the director, or some language to that effect.
Yeah, or you could just say town council shall determine a fee from time to time based on resolutions of council, and then that way you can pass it by resolution, and if there's a bunch of encroachment permits or whatever else, you can lower the fee or increase the fee as the town deems it necessary.
I would like to amend to include a permit fee, town council to.
So can, I believe the amendment, you actually haven't moved an amendment yet. Would you like to move an amendment? And then would you like to have your amendment include the suggestion made by Councilmember Farrell?
I would like to move it and include Mr. Farrell's recommendation as well.
Okay, so that will be a new section E dealing with evidence of existing conditions prior to any work. That's under 3E, and either in 2 or 3 at an appropriate place we'll come up with language that would reflect some not an explicit amount of a fee, but make explicit that a permit fee may be charged.
I agree.
Okay. Do I hear a second on that amendment?
Second.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Now we can vote on that amendment. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, now we are back on the underlying motion, which is to approve the ordinance as amended. Is there any further discussion? Oh, any further discussion on?
No.
Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
The ordinance is approved on first reading as amended. Next item of business is to consider approval of the amendments to the Town of Kiowa Island Employee Handbook. Just a little bit of context before I entertain a motion for approval. This is the result of a fair amount of work that I had started actually reviewing and proposing a number of changes to the HR handbook, realized that there were a number of provisions that I had seen in other employment policies that were not reflected in the town's existing HR handbook. Then we had a pre-existing relationship with an HR consulting firm called FGP, reached out to them to assist us with this process, and indeed, they provided a lot of input. So just to let the council know, just kind of at a high level summary, changes were made to a number of the provisions to the then existing handbook, or the existing handbook, but the provisions added that were not in the current handbook that were added by FGP included guidelines for conduct and disciplinary policy, working off the clock policy, termination and discipline standards, separation of employment standards, job abandonment provisions, and provisions dealing with exit interviews, provisions dealing with return of town of property, provisions dealing with closing statement and handbook revisions, and a provision dealing with acknowledgments, and plus beefing up the at-will employment. Updated policies including at-will employment, reasonable accommodation statement, equal opportunity policy, non-harassment, non-discrimination, payment of wages and dealing with exempt employees, personal time off policies, parental leave policies, and tuition reimbursement policies, amongst others. So it's been a fairly substantial rewrite. I believe all council members have had the revised handbook for at least a few days, but I would now entertain a motion for approval of the town HR handbook as amended, as revised.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion.
Anything on council abandonment?
Well, if you would like to add, the only problem is you're not an employee. If you would like to become an employee and subject to all the HR policies, we can certainly take that into consideration.
I read this.
Well, that's something we'll have to do later. I have a number of typos. I don't think I should go through the typos here. We can catch up with you and/or someone
Yeah, I don't
else.
think town attorney or
Right.
deputy, I think we
Right,
can
and
make
spell checks, right.
clerical
All right,
errors, changes.
but there's a couple things I do think we
Yep.
should discuss. One of them is on page -38, has to do with gifts and gratuities. The second paragraph says, "No municipal officer." Is that town council? Because that's not the purpose of this.
You are correct in that the gifts policy applies to, that we adopted.
I know, but this is an
But you're absolutely
manual.
right. You are absolutely right. So the municipal well, no, I'm sorry. No. There are 4 municipal officers.
Okay,
There are 4 people deemed to be, they're statutory positions that are deemed to be officer positions of the town administrator, the town clerk, the town attorney, and the town treasurer / finance director.
Great, okay.
Okay, that's right.
Okay, following up on that, you talk about what you can't do, but there's nothing in here, the consequence that you do something incorrect,
You're talking about in regards to the gift and gratuity?
or anything.
Well.
Using that as an
well,
example, but yes, what's the consequence?
No, anything in here, there are other provisions that if you violate any of the provisions of the handbook as an employee, you are subject to various disciplinary measures up and including dismissal.
Okay, where would that be summarized? Is it in here? I'm sorry?
4.05,
4 point,
page
Yeah.
IV-21.
And in
Got
the,
it. Thank you.
in the gifts policy itself, there are enforcement-related provisions. So it's a separate one that applies to council members, volunteers, and others.
okay, all right, so, Steph, something you or I are gonna have to check on, the work week here is 37 and a half hours. There's a number of references in here of a 40-hour work week. And the math works out for a 40-hour work week, such as on page 23. That's just one example.
So there are intentionally, in fact, on 23, overtime actually only kicks in after 40 hours.
After 40.
Yes. So that's intentional, and
Okay.
there are 40-hour work week references in the Family Health and Medical Leave Act, I believe, as well.
Okay, fair enough. So, but this is something I'll discuss with Steph. And I think one last thing that we need to discuss jointly is on page 14, has to do with special pay provisions. Under declared emergencies, there's 3 criteria that must be met. And it says all, not just one, but all. One is the mayor declares a state of emergency, the town has suspended normal operations, or the town has activated its emergency operations center. And the town has done that. So if town hall is lost in a hurricane event or whatever, where would that fit? So you don't have a place for the staff to report. You no longer would have, so this is a month after the hurricane's gone, you would no longer have an emergency operations center. I suspect the state of emergency is gone or over. Where does that, how do we take care of that?
So in my previous life, we would consider alternative work locations as the place of work. So we had disaster recovery scenarios. And in some cases, disaster recovery scenarios said our building was taken down, we went to another building down in like Long Beach. And if that building was taken down, then you work from home. Those were all considered standard workplaces, given the disaster recovery scenario.
Okay, so.
That's the way to think about it.
Yeah, it is. So bottom line is, we need wording of that effect. I think in the event this building here is lost.
So.
I mean, because this whole thing about declared emergency has to do with getting additional payment. Well, you shouldn't be getting additional payment. You should be working at a home.
No, you're only able to get the special pay provisions. That's why you have to meet all those 3 criteria. That section with regarding to special pay only applies in that very limited circumstance for a
Right,
period
okay,
of
so
time.
how do we take care of what, or do you guys not need it in this document to be codified? What happens when the building's not usable?
Well, there is both inclement weather and short-term emergencies, and I thought there was some specific reference during to Stephanie to other instances with the town was closed, but that may be, that's not remember, this is just special pay provisions. Otherwise, if, for example, your office is being worked on or constructed, there's no special pay provision. You are still required to do your work. It may be sitting at a desk. It may be, a table at home.
So what I'm hearing is you're okay. It's on, I guess it's under 3.07 hybrid work policy, so you're okay the way this is to take into consideration what I just.
Well, particularly given the fact that if the building were flattened
Right.
then we could, at that point in time, because this can always be amended by council at any point in time, we could have a special call meeting, pass a resolution, and to determine how we were going to handle.
Fair enough. I just wanted to raise
Okay,
that issue.
okay,
Okay,
for
so
sure.
that's all I need to talk about.
So, Mr. Mayor, my comment would be, first and foremost, this is incredibly more robust than what we had before. More comprehensive, more robust, and includes a lot of things that even I hadn't considered. So I want to applaud you and Ms. Tillerson and the work of the consultants for doing this. This is, I've tried to keep up with the changes, and the changes outpaced my attempt to keep up with the changes and offer suggestions. So, excellent work. Thank you both.
Thank you.
On an aside, we need something like this for volunteers and town council?
Well, town council are not employees.
I know, I said like this, I know, because we're not, town council would not be included in this employee handbook, neither would volunteers. But a volunteer, we need to be able to address their poor behavior if they do something wrong. And they should also have a manual that they have to live up to.
Well, that is addressed both by, we do have a volunteer policy that does allow removal of volunteers. But they are volunteers, so I would be uncomfortable trying to subject them to an onerous regulatory regime.
No, but-
We're subject to.
Sexual harassment, for example. You know, all volunteers should not be subject to sexual harassment of any kind. So you have to, I'm just thinking if there's a manual out there for employees, there should be something similar like that for volunteers, not anywhere near as robust, and town council.
We do have a volunteer policy. We actually approved it not long ago. It's just 2 or 3 council meetings ago, I thought. So
Yeah,
I
and
encourage you to take a look back at that and whether we want to revisit that. But we did just recently adopt a.
Yeah, because along Luke's lines, you know, upon reading this document, it just opened my thinking process to all of these items, and I said, oh my gosh.
Well, but also understand and appreciate there are a range of, again, they are employees, but there are also a range of state and federal laws that are applicable to the employer-employee relationship that would not be applicable to a volunteer relationship. So that's a lot of what was added in here by FGP was reflective of that, as well in addition to just good HR policies and practices.
All right, and are you comfortable that the ethics provision by the state would cover all of these things for elected officials, like all of us here? Do we have to go beyond that?
We are covered as elected officials by the State Ethics Act. We have imposed on ourselves as a much more onerous gifts policy than is required by the state ethics statute. We have previously talked about, and we can revisit, actually additional ethics-related provisions that are separate and apart from just the gifts rule.
All right, no, but well, I didn't mean to pick on gifts, the municipal officer just happened to show up under the gifts paragraph, that's why we're talking about it. But the bottom line question is, you're okay with town council being covered by the ethics policy for the state?
The town council is covered.
I'm meaning it's robust enough.
No, I'm not concluding that, and that's the reason that my belief it was not sufficiently robust with regard to the acceptance or solicitation of gifts, and that's the reason, from my view at the time, that was the primary issue with regard to the lack of robustness of the State Ethics Act applicable to municipal officers, and which would include council members. So that's the reason we adopted that. I do believe that there are other provisions of the State Ethics Act that, if we wanted to pose on ourselves, could be strengthened, and I think if we want to have that further conversation, but that's really separate from the
No,
employee.
I know it's separate. I just went on a tangent. Okay.
Any further questions or comments? Did I have a motion? No. Entertain a motion for approval of the amendments to the employee handbook.
So move.
Second.
Or the employee handbook as revised as of March 1, 2025. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Tab 7. Consider approval of the Resiliency Committee Charter. Would I'm going to turn to you, Councilmember Kay. Do you want to go ahead and entertain a motion first, or do you want to have provide any introduction?
Entertain the motion.
I would move approval of the Resiliency Committee Charter that's before us.
Second.
Discussion?
So, yes, some discussion around this. First off, Phil, I appreciate your comments at the very outset of the meeting, some 2 or 3 days ago. Anyway, your comment that this should be a very inclusive committee. You're right, and as populated so far, it does have representatives from Kika and from the resort and from the Conservancy and the multitude of Ks that are going to have involvement in this. But you're right, I think we need to look even beyond that to see if there isn't some other substructure that we can make sure that we're crossing the lines, because this is the kind of committee that is going to require a lot of collaboration. So thank you for that point. And then your other point about the timeliness of this is also well taken. This is a complicated initiative that has moved forward in fits and starts over the year. I was reading the Sea Level Rise report, which was 2018, and it's based on a lot of the Charleston numbers that you had referenced earlier. That's a lot of work was done to 2018, hasn't been updated since then. So we do need to look carefully at that. But the progress that we've made since Sea Level Rise was moved ahead very well in the Marsh Management Comprehensive Plan, but again, it's a bit of a fit and start. It's such a complicated issue that unless you really put your hands around it, it's just easy to fall by the wayside and take very small incremental steps forward, but not the kind of steps that can be taken, that absolutely must be taken. Again, we can't stop the sea levels from rising, and we can't stop some storm surges, but we can have a committee looking really hard at ways to mitigate that. And so that's what this committee is all about. We're going to need tremendous collaboration. We're going to have a really aggressive and ambitious agenda. Things that need to be considered will be stormwater management, sea level rise, watershed planning, the Go Green initiative, this kind of standards that we put around bulkheads and around living shorelines and around erosion control, whether or not we tackle a full resiliency plan. These are all things that we're going to need to tackle right away. And to do so, we're going to need a committee that's really willing to put its pedal to the metal and work hard on it. This is also an opportunity. At various times over the last 10 years, Keough has been very upfront and outpacing other communities that are similar to ours in terms of resiliency efforts. And then it will go dormant, and then we'll take another step forward. Well, this will be an opportunity for us to take the lead again and to become one of the benchmarks of the East Coast. So I'm very excited about this. I appreciate already the support that the council has shown in moving this forward. And even though I think I've been thinking about it and working on it for about 6 months, we've only had it in front of council for a month and a half, maybe, for revisions and review and for input. And council's here today, ready to approve this. So, and I should mention that Petrea is going to be our staff support for this committee. The charter gives, I'm assuming everybody here has taken a look at the charter, but it lays out the major objectives that we're going to have, and the composition of the committee, again, will be representative of so many of the different Ks. But this is, by way of background, we've taken the marsh management work group, and we have basically taken the initiatives that that group was working on and formalized them into a standing committee, because we need this whole agenda, this whole initiative to have more teeth than it had just as a work group. It got lost in all of the other things that were being considered and worked on by the Environmental Committee. So this is our opportunity to set it aside, to give it the priority that it deserves, and to move forward. So with that background, thank you all. I'm completely, obviously, supportive of this, of passing this one.
Any other, no, I think we had the motion. She asked for the motion. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, I would, it's not a recommendation, it's just food for thought. I would ask you to think about whether somebody from the Planning Commission should be on this committee or not.
Oh, actually, thank you. That's, Jean Babinek is.
Okay, great. I think because of the
Will be-
resiliency and the comprehensive plan, I think tying that in, and
Yes,
so if you've already thought about that, great.
he's already agreed.
An out-of-the-box thought to consider is, would you maybe think about enlisting somebody from Seabrook? There are some resiliency issues that affect both of us, and it might be a way to bridge some of those resiliency issues, and a couple of them are big issues. So I'm not making a recommendation, just think about that. Is that something that would be appropriate, and would it benefit us? Would it benefit them? Does
As a
it?
voting member, I don't know, but as an ad hoc member, perhaps.
Just
I'll
food for
think
thought.
about it.
Food for
Thank
thought.
you.
Just to be clear, we eliminated the requirement with regard to all our other standing committees of Kiowa residency. And in a couple of cases, we have members, one or two instances of members who are not Kiowa property owners or residents. One is of Cacique. We've certainly talked about, for example, on the Arts Council, having, the Seabrook residents. So
SATEX committee is.
yeah, I would have no issue, and as far as I'm concerned, they can be a voting member. It's just ultimately the chair is recommending the composition of the committees to the council, and I suspect it would be a unlikely event that a committee chair would be recommending all non-Kiowa residents, and that the council would approve that.
Yes. But again, it just, things like the cutting of the spit, that definitely involves them. That's part of resiliency, and wastewater treatment and the pollution of the rivers. Just, you've got it. You've got the ball. Thank you.
Other comments?
All in favor of approval of the Resiliency Committee Charter?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Next agenda item, approval of BZA appointments. Stephanie or John, are you going to present these? Or?
So this went out, we pushed this out as we normally do now with regards to our committees availability. We had 2 openings, and we did not have anyone in addition to express interest. So the 2 that currently are on have asked to be reappointed. They're eligible to be reappointed. It would be Larry Rosenfeld until 2028, and Philip Adams until 2028.
Okay, would entertain a motion for approval of the two reappointments to the BZA.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion is approved. Tab 9 is the review and approval of the state accommodation tax charter and guidelines. At tab 9, and as the chairman of the state tax committee, and Mr. Councilmember Farrell, if you want to provide some background and context before we entertain a motion, or would you like to just have a motion entertained? And
Let's just do the motion.
okay. Move approval of the included state accommodation tax charter and guidelines.
So moved.
Second? Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion.
So I will talk just a little bit about this. As I joined the state tax committee last year, I found that there was no charter. So I said, well, we probably need to have a charter and define what we're doing and how we're doing it. So really, that's what this intent is. So that part of it, I think, is pretty straightforward. The second part of this is page 3 is kind of the application requirements. And what we found out in going through this is there are different guidelines. They're mostly overlapping, but there are different guidelines for state accommodation versus county, local, hospitality, all the difference. So we dug deeper into that. And one of the things we did was we looked at what other beach communities were doing and how they were allocating monies. And it was an incredible education. Learned a lot about what people were doing, what actually they were financing and how they were financing it, or what they were paying for, what the requirements were for applicants. Some other places required applicants to be within the town, to be nonprofit. There was a third, what was the third big one? There was a third big one.
Some are.
Oh, matching funds. Matching funds was another one. So there was and all of them fell clearly within the state guidelines for the use of the funds and what they were doing. We have the luxury of a significant amount of revenue coming in, and quite frankly, a bit of a struggle spending it all. So we didn't want to put any requirements on those other than an attempt to spend the money in Kiowa or the nearby surroundings. We didn't want to put any other requirements on the applicants at this time. And so we've learned a lot. I think over the course of time, we're going to educate the committee on kind of what we've learned over the past 6 or 8 weeks, so that we have a level playing field. And we'd like to expand the application grants, both within the town and outside of what we're currently doing. Sorry, Mr. Warren, we can't give it all to you. But there are a lot of good efforts out there that we're not funding, just like we saw a lot of the charitable efforts today. And there are a lot of other things we could do with state or local or hospitality or beverage tax money. So more work to be done in terms of educating ourselves and educating the committee, and then bringing in a more broad-based group of folks where we can fund and do good work.
So at a drop-in meeting I chaired last year or whatever, I don't recall who it was who asked anymore, but I was challenged as to why we don't have more people submitting applications off of Kiowa. And what you just discussed reminded me of that discussion. So I'm just curious, how do we go about recruiting more people from off the island?
Yeah, so it's not probably the greatest effort, but we post it on our website, and then our treasurer reaches out to certain organizations who she knows might qualify or have qualified in the past. We can think about what's a broader way to reach out to organizations, but that's been the way it has been. It's been more of a slight push, I guess is the way I'd call it. It's not a real broad-based attempt to really solicit, and we need to think about whether that's appropriate and whether we're going to get folks that are going to be able to do things that are predominantly, again, for tourist-related activities, promoting, growing, and maintaining tourists on Kiowa.
The island connector, how far how far does that get circulated?
Island Connection, the local newspaper,
Yeah.
it's kind of Seabrook and Kiowa. I don't know
Yeah.
how more broadly beyond that.
I mean, we could go to the Charleston newspaper.
Yeah, well, that'd
to
be
be
a lot more.
broad-based.
Yeah.
But again, we don't want to be overrun by applications that are going to waste our time going through it. So
Right.
it's really the town of Kiowa, and kind of the way we think about it now is contiguous or nearby locales that have organizations that are within those domains.
Okay, all right.
But if you think of somebody who's going to be able, the one exception, I guess, and this is by state, is we do fund the Charleston Visitors Bureau. They do all the true formal advertising. Now, they're Charleston, so you could say that's kind of the boundary, at least for now. But we're happy to receive any applications.
Yeah, I just want to note that the state requirement is simply that the expenditures are primarily in the geographic areas of the county or municipality. So it's primarily and in the geographic area. There was an instance of I've, as Councilmember Farrell has, I've spent a fair amount of time over the last couple of weeks getting into a range of accommodation tax related issues and reading a lot of State Attorney General's opinion. And there was one that actually ended up being litigated where it was either Myrtle Beach or Hilton Head subsequent to one of the big hurricanes, Hugo, it may have been Hugo, that they allocated like $100,000 or maybe it was $1 million to hurricane relief in the region. The court ultimately concluded that that was both, it was in the geographic area and it broadly promoted tourism as well, and said that was an allowed expenditure. So.
Okay.
We're not looking to be that aggressive with.
But it was, I mean, as Councilmember Farrell pointed out, you know, every other municipality we looked at actually has, you know, a set of published guidelines regarding the allocation of funds. And again, it was like IOP or one of them was
Myrtle Beach.
Myrtle Beach, it was only nonprofit organizations, number one. Number two, only within the town. And then some were only like required matching funds. Now, the difference in most of those communities, for whatever reason, this relates a little bit to our outreach, is there appeared to be many more nonprofit organizations in those areas and applications, requested applications or requests for funding that's exceeded the amount of funding that was being made available to those organizations. So there were, in some cases, you know, 2, 3, 4 dozen grantees of varying amount. And most of those cases were a lot of different nonprofits that were fit within the categories of the allowed expenditures under the state statute. We just don't seem to have as many of those for whatever reason as do other organizations, other communities.
And I guess the last thing I would say is we have been very, very conservative historically in how we've allocated not just state tax, but all the other accommodation tax monies and beverage tax monies. We're not looking to change that, but we're looking to make sure that if there are places where we can spend it and we should be spending it from a town perspective, that we're doing that and we're not spending it out of the general budget.
And to her credit, Dorota has kept us, you know, said, well, what about this? What about that? And raised questions and want to make sure we're all on the same page. That's the job she should be doing, and she's pushing back on some issues. But some things we kind of learned we did them a certain way for a certain, I mean, it was for not a particularly clear reason. It was just a decision. We do it that way in the past. Didn't mean that we had to do it that way in the future. One specific issue I'll highlight to everybody that we've now going forward are going to approach a little bit differently is that heretofore the town has always applied the 70-30 rule to ATAX related expenditures. And I've gotten clarification on this from both our town attorney. My reading of the statute was otherwise. Town attorney agrees, and the MASCA, Municipal Science Association of South Carolina attorney agrees, is There, if you look at the list of tourism-related expenditures under the state statute, 1 through 9, number 4 says criminal justice system, law enforcement, fire protection, solid waste collection, health facilities when required to serve tourist facilities. This is based on the estimated percentage of cost directly attributable to tourists. That's where that comes from.
Yes.
That clause is not in any of the other enumerated allowed expenditures, which means kind of as a matter of statutory construction, it only applies to that one. And so all the others are 100% allowed expenditures. But that's the reason, for example, our CCSO contract, beach patrol, et cetera, that fits within that classification.
Yes.
So it's subject to the 70 or 70-30 allocation.
And let me say this again, Ms. Schubert has been great at keeping us out of trouble, and we've again confirmed and reaffirmed with her, please push back hard on us where we don't have an either attorney general opinion or legal guidance, and she's encouraged to do that, and she's been doing that very, very nicely this past week.
But by the way, on that one specific, I was just raising, part of what she pointed out, she says she has to deal with is we have to file a report with the Tourism Expenditure Review Committee, TURC. That's required by state law. Recommendations, advisory recommendations are made by the State Tax Committee. Ultimately, the council makes the decision, but there's a report she has to file, and their column says town-related expenditures, it's a little 3 asterisks, it says just percentage allocation. I actually spoke with the chair of the TURC, and he goes, well, I talked to my administrative assistant or something like that. But I said, I used the example, if we had a beach renourishment project, 100% would be sent, well, yes, absolutely, because that's an allowed thing. But I said, your column seems to suggest that every expenditure by the town is subject to the 70%. It's just a form, but statute says what it says.
So I'll close by saying we've learned a tremendous amount in the past 6 weeks about what we can do, what we can't do, how we should do it, and what others do. And I think we're in very great shape with both the revenues we get and kind of the demand on the assets that are demand on those revenues for things that are really, truly working toward generating tourism and putting heads in beds, as the phrase goes.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approval of the accommodations tax charter and guidelines?
Aye.
Aye. That's the last item of old business. We have reached citizens' comments on non-agenda items. Mr. DiStefano.
Dave DiStefano, 31 Burroughs Hall. It's a comment on the parking near the bridge where a lot of people park at the lot. I've noticed a lot of kayaks, paddle boards, and people parking there, taking the bikes off the rack and getting on the bike path. The other day, though, something was really dramatic. I was leaving the island, I was behind a fire truck. He was going a little fast. He didn't have his lights on, but it was explained to me he's probably going to cover for another station, so he's moving. He was probably going around 40 when he got to that area. Somebody coming the other way in a very large pickup truck was going to do a U-turn to park, and he couldn't turn sharp enough. And I just want to give credit to the guy driving the fire truck, because, I mean, he just missed him. I mean, a lot of people do that turnaround, and that's very dangerous. But, the kayaks, I thought one of the things we were trying to eliminate was people hauling their boats down there, and I've seen quite a bit of that. So I just wanted to comment on that.
So thank you, Dave. One of the things that has just come up is that the Environmental Committee and ancillary folks are looking again at that stretch of roadway, and the whole proposal that was almost a year ago now, that we were really looking really hard at constructing a ramp down the, so if you follow the road where the parking is, and then the ramp down to the river, then to try to control the pedestrian traffic or traffic that had kayaks or whatever. That has gone dormant, but it will be considered again in the very, very near future, largely because of this proposal that the Conservancy has put forward. The issue that stalled that whole discussion really revolved around pedestrian safety and biker safety. We couldn't figure out as a council or as a committee how we were going to handle that issue, and it remains a very, very viable issue today. No answers yet, but we'll be looking at it again.
One thing maybe for the safety folks at the other end of the dais here is we might want to post no U-turn signs just after that bridge, because my experience is as you're coming into Kiowa, there's a lot of folks, two things. One, making U-turns to park legally, and one, contractors just pulling over or big trucks pulling over just to wait until 7 a.m. so they can get through the gate. So two things maybe to think about are a no U-turn, and I know you guys love those white pontoons in the middle of the road, but maybe something to prevent U-turns there as well. Food for
As
thought.
David was talking, I was thinking the exact same thing, but yeah, we'll bring it up.
Well, the alternative I would just note is somebody's going to come in all the way, kind of try to go through the gate, turn around past that, or they come in, take a ride on Beach Walker, circle through the gas station, and come back out. There's no good solution. Any other?
You were talking about a U-turn right at the bridge.
No, he was turning at the end of the parking area to get into the parking area, past the bridge, inbound. So he got right down to the end where he was going to get in like the last slot.
Okay, that's what I thought you meant.
So half the truck was still in the middle of the road. And there was traffic coming the other way, so the fire truck didn't have any room to go around him. Thank God he saw him. I mean, I bet you he stopped this far.
Just note for the record, there have been, there continue to be issues with that parking area, and there are and would be issues with taking away that parking area. So, any other citizen comments? Council member comments?
Not from me.
No, thank you.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
We are adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Wow.